Our topic this evening is the money system of the United States, or the lack of. I think this is interesting to each one of us. It's something that is vital to each one of us. So let me ask you a couple of questions. Has anyone bought anything today? Did anyone in here buy anything today? Nobody bought anything today. Did anybody sell anything today? Nobody sold anything today. Or it must have been. Okay, well, how long can you go in a week's time without buying or selling? 1 day. Money is something that is very important to all of us. Let me ask you this. How many of you think that you have money in your pocket right now? Anybody think they have money in their pocket right now? I think that most of you would agree that it is a timely subject and something that it concerns us all. Our speaker this evening, Mr. Bruce McCarthy, just to give you a little bit of background on the man. He's a former charter pilot, a former corporate pilot for several years. He's a businessman. He ran his own business in the food business in the state of Maine for several years. And through some of his personal experiences with the bureaucratic system in the state of Maine on such issues as taxation and licensing, he became interested and started a self-study into the monetary system. And it just kind of evolved into a sort of a full-time thing for him right now. And he is sharing this knowledge that he has acquired and the experiences that he has had with the people across the country of the United States here. He travels with his wife, Jan, who helps him out. As you can see, she's got a table with some of their literature set up over there, and supports him in his venture to try and share his knowledge, his experiences with other people, to inform us of some of the things that he's gone through and some of the things that he's learned. He told me it was all right to tell this little story on him. He doesn't have a BS, an MS, or a PhD behind his name. And it's probably a good thing, because you all know that out here in this part of the country what BS stands for. And MS is just more of the same, and PhD is piled higher and deeper, you know. So he's basically a self-educated man on this subject that he's going to talk about tonight, the things that he has lived through. And I'd like for you to give a warm, wall-to-wall welcome to Bruce McCarthy.
Thank you. I thank each and every one of you for coming out tonight. I have probably the greatest difficulty in explaining anything with regards to money and economics to, I'm going to say, three classes of people. The first class of people is going to be the bureaucrat. The bureaucrat figures that he's here to get us to serve him. He believes that a public servant, well, in fact, a public servant believes the public is the servant. They're very, very difficult to get through to, as we'll find out a little bit later on here. The second class of people that I have the most difficulty getting through to are patriots of long standing. People who have been active for, 10, 15, 20 years, and they figure that they've heard all truth that there is to hear. I went to one meeting up in Wyoming a while back, and a man told me that he's heard the money issue 5,000 times. My wife and I both chimed in like stereo. Well, let's make it 5,001. And on 5001, and I could see within about 10 minutes of the presentation that he was enjoying it. It sounds like a boastful statement, doesn't it? I don't mean to do that. But what I'm trying to get at is that people seem to feel ingrained with this notion that they've already heard 2 + 2 = 4, and you couldn't hear it any other way. The third category of person who's the most difficult to get through to is a person who has been through the brain laundry system, what we call the public fool system, and perhaps has gotten some of those degrees that our brother has just spoken of. The Proverbs tells us in chapter 17 and verse 24 that wisdom is before him that hath understanding. There's not very much understanding today. People know how to read words, but they don't understand what they read. But the eyes of a fool are in the ends of the earth. That, to me, indicates that most people are just interested in the bottom line to a particular problem. They don't want to understand the problem. They just want to know how it's all going to come out. And what should I do? How should I make my investments? So we have a lot of investment people in this country trying to either soak you or lead you, one way or another. I'm not here to give you any ideas or any tips on investments, which stocks to get and not to get, and things of that nature. I'm going to use an outline tonight because I've been given one of the great spiritual gifts that the Apostle Paul spoke of. Any of you who have read the Scriptures know that there are various spiritual gifts. One of them is the gift of teaching. Some have the gift to prophesy. Some have the gift of healing. But I have the greatest gift of all. I have the gift of tongues, and I can keep mine going for hours on end. So I use an outline to kind of keep me on target. I'm going to ask you to be intellectually honest and not answer a matter before you've heard it. King Solomon told us in Proverbs 18:13 that a man who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame unto him. So we're in hopes that there won't be anybody answering a matter too soon, that there won't be any folly and certainly no shame here tonight. It's going to be a two-part presentation. We will take a break a little bit beyond the halfway point. The second part won't be quite as long as the first part, so your fanny won't be quite as tired in the second session. I'm going to use two sources of material. I'm going to be quoting extensively from a diversity of Federal Reserve publications, this being exemplary of them. I have many, many more, but I've only brought a sample. The Federal Reserve Bank, which is our central bank, is considered to be by both pro and con to be the monetary authority of the United States. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's quote them. Then we're going to occasionally quote from the Scriptures, because the Scriptures are the ultimate authority. God didn't ask us what we thought of them either. We know, for example, from the Scriptures in 1 Timothy 6:10, for the love of money is the root of all evil. The Bible does not say that the love of money, friction, does not say that money is the root of all evil. It says the love of it is. Jesus said in Matthew 6:24, for you cannot serve two masters, for you love the one and hate the other, you cling to one and despise the other, but you cannot serve God and what? And he didn't say Lucifer, Satan, or the devil, did he? The God of wealth, riches, or money. Because we don't have any money in circulation in America. We haven't had since 1965. All we have in circulation in our free country are receipts for money. So now it is the love of receipts for money that's the root of all evil. The problem being that somebody gets all the receipts for absolutely nothing. And therein lies the rub. To give you some sort of an idea how confusing the subject of money is, we take the Lewiston Morning Tribune, Tuesday, May 24th. Federal deficit. I don't know if anybody ever noticed this article or not. Anybody see this particular article? Dateline Washington, which we call Malfunction Junction. It says here, Treasury Secretary Donald Regan warned congressional leaders Wednesday that the federal government will be out of money in a day unless Congress acts to raise the debt limit. They haven't spent any money for years. They don't collect any. They're already out of money. But to give you some sort of an idea of how confusing the subject is, we have here an article that appeared in the St. Louis Globe-Democrat, Tuesday, June 1, 1982. And it's authored by Louis Rukeyser. Has anybody ever heard that name? Okay. So we're not talking about a nobody like Bruce McCarthy. It's entitled, Just What Is Money? Does Anyone Know? Dateline New York again. Some of the nation's leading experts on money have begun very quietly to make what many would regard as an astonishing admission. They don't know what they're talking about. I'd be kind of quiet about that myself if I was an expert, wouldn't you? In this case, as it happens, they mean it literally. They don't know what money is in 1982. For those of you who figure that you knew what money was, I didn't know what money was. I thought I did, but I didn't. Take George W. McKinney, Jr., a highly respected economist who was retiring next month from New York's Irving Trust Company. This is no spring chicken, and this is no small bank. Rukeyser, the guy that we can watch on that electronic campfire in our living room there when we watch our Wall Street programs, puts to him this question, quote, "Is it then," he says, "that we just don't know what money is these days?" Here's the answer from an expert who retired. Quote, "Never did know." I'm kind of glad he retired, aren't you? Never did know, confessed McKinney, and then while listeners to our conversation chuckled nervously, made clear he wasn't kidding. Now, what would the chance be, folks, that any one of us in this room could write a letter to Standard Oil Company and ask for the definition of gasoline, and have their chief chemist write back to us and say, "Well, we don't know, and we never did." No wonder it things. Or we could write a letter to McDonald's Corporation and ask for the definition of Hamburg, and they write back to us and say, "Well, we don't know, and we never did." Come to think of it, I'd believe it. The Federal Reserve is just as confused as Mr. Rukeyser and Mr. McKinney, and they admit it on page 10 of a book entitled The Federal Reserve System, Purposes and Functions. For one thing, they say, it is not clear how best to define money. That's the monetary authority of the United States of America. They're not even sure how to define money, if you've taken economics in school. Economists have not been able to agree on the best definition of money. Those are the experts, and they can't agree. We could go to college and become enlightened, and perhaps study this economics textbook. Has quite a fancy title. It's called Readings in Money, National Income and Stabilization Policy. Have you noticed, for example, that when we discuss banking, economics, and government, that the word policy shows up quite frequently? Economic policy, fiscal policy, domestic policy, bank policy. What does the word policy come from? You recognize the word, a root word in the word policy? How about police? It comes from a word called policy, which means to control, manipulate, or manage. The word policy is used in this book no less than 2,177 times. On page 157, we have an article here that's entitled Commercial Banks as Creators of Money. It's authored by James Tobin. Now, James Tobin, at the time of this article's being written, was Sterling Professor of Economics at Yale University. And on page 157, we have approximately, I'm going to say, 3 sentences on this whole page that were not underlined by the student whose book this was. And I underlined this one sentence that he chose not to underline, because I didn't go to college. For example, an eminent monetary economist, more candid than many of his colleagues, admits that we don't really know what money is, but proceeds to argue that whatever it is, its supply should grow regularly at a rate of the order of 3 to 4% per year. Excuse me, what do you do for a living? Well, I'm an economist. Good, I'm looking for somebody to define money for me. Well, I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, it ought to grow at 3 or 4% a year. There's a man who really knows his subject. You can learn a lot from him. Or we can learn a little bit from a couple economists. Heck, 2 are better than 1, right? We have an article here that's entitled Analytical Aspects of Anti-Inflation Policy. This article is authored by Paul Samuelson and Robert M. Solow. Well, who are they? Well, at the time, they were professors of economics at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Now, there are a lot of our young people that love to go to MIT so they can come out to be real wizards. Hang on to this depth of revelation here on page 117 from these two economists. Quote, "If there is anything in this line of thought, it may be that one of the important causes of inflation is inflation." Of course, I suppose you knew that all along, didn't you? Page 118. "We leave it as an open question. It may be that creeping inflation leads only to creeping inflation." If you had a natural resistance to the subject of economics when you were in college or in high school, it may be that within your genetic seed package you have a natural repugnance for being led by blind guides. Because we know that when the blind lead the blind, they both fall into the ditch. And maybe you just have an aversion to falling into ditches. Some people are of the persuasion, those are the people who aren't here tonight, which is most of them, I can always tell I'm in the right place when it comes to truth. You know how I can tell? There's hardly anybody there. If this room was full, I would have said, "Oh my gosh, I must have fallen into an Amway convention." Oh, if there were a lot of women, I'd think maybe it was a Mary Kay. Truth is found here a little, there a little, line upon line, precept upon precept. But some people seem to think that if you ignore a subject, that the problems that are attendant with that subject will also just kind of go away. Yet Congressman Ron Paul, speaking before the House on March 31st, 1982, told us something about the plight of our free people in this free country, land of the milk and honey. Quote, "During 1971, business and personal failures and bankruptcies totaled 201,352. During 1981, 519,063. During the first 2 months of 1982, he said, that rate accelerated by 50%. Aren't you glad you live in a free country? And not in a third world country. Some people seem to figure that maybe if we ignore the problem, we won't have any future problems. And yet, while out in the Bahamas about 4 years ago, my wife and I got talking with an Austrian couple, Hansi and Dolores Medinger. She was age 71, a very youthful woman, had seen a lot in her years. And we got talking about a lot of subjects that the average American will never be able to discuss, or will have a difficult time discussing with people of Europe. But during the course of our discussion, she blurts out, "You know," she says, "I'm really quite frightened about the possibility of a third world war." I said, "Why's that?" "Because there are so many banks." She says, "In Austria we have banks on every street corner." And she says, "That's exactly what happened before the last World War." She was old enough to remember. A very perspicacious statement coming from a woman whose number one son, Gregor, works for an international banking house in New York. How many people have noticed that over the last, say, 10 years, bank buildings in our downtown districts have just kind of sprouted up like little mushrooms? Things are a little different downtown. It used to be the tallest building in our town was the church steeple. And now that stands in the shadow of a bank. Doesn't it? If we're going to understand a subject, it is incumbent upon us to understand the words that are indigenous to that subject. You see, if you wanted to communize a small country, you would just simply send in a bunch of idiots with AK-47s and you just take it over. But to communize a country this size, you defeat the people through misapplication of words. Does that sound absurd? Words are so important that in 1961, the Committee on the Judiciary, the United States Senate, published a pamphlet entitled Wordsmanship. And they gave it a subtitle, Semantics as a Communist Weapon. And on page 1, quoting a professor, they tell us, quote, "This natural confusion of language," there's some young people in here, maybe they're not confused about language, I don't know. If I were to ask, we'll stop here for a second. I'm just going to take a little side trip. I like to take side trips. If I were to ask you people what the word willful meant, what would you think it meant? Would you agree that the average person on the street would believe that something that was done willfully was done of his own will? Don't be afraid to nod your head or even shake it if you want to. I don't want to be the only person to get any circulation in my body tonight. Would you think willful was what people just did of their own will? You notice, for example, if a person doesn't fill out a 1040 form, that when the government or the Internal Revenue Service moves against that person, they don't say, this guy Ray over here didn't file a 1040. You know what they say? They would say that he willfully failed to file. Or they might say he didn't pay the tax. No, they wouldn't say that. They would say he willfully didn't pay. He willfully failed. He willfully failed to pay, willfully failed to report, willfully failed to file. Why the word willful? What does the word willful mean? Does anybody know? Black's Law Dictionary, 5th edition, which is the current edition, tells us that something that was done willfully was done voluntarily with evil intent. The lawyers weren't too stupid when they put the statutes together, were they? Most people think that income is everything that comes in, don't they? What's the word income mean? Somebody here knows. A gain or a profit. How about compensation for labor? If I went to work for somebody and earned a salary, would that be income? No. How many people don't know that? About 93 million? 93 million people who erroneously filled out a 1040 form last year. That's not too many ignorant people, is it? And you know what? They all went through the school system. Beautiful, isn't it? This natural confusion of language invites artificial manipulation. A medieval French king said, quote, "He who can't dissimulate can't rule." What's the word dissimulate mean? It means to conceal by pretense. I had to look it up. I didn't know that. What are they saying here? They're saying that if you can't look at your constituents with a straight face while you're robbing him blind, you'll never make it in the king business. Of course, we're very fortunate in this country that our politicians would never do that to us, would they? Hence, language is not only a tool to communicate, it also can be used or abused as a weapon to mislead, to create wrong impressions, and to induce false thinking. And if you, like myself, ever once believed that these pieces of paper were dollars, money, cash, currency, federal, embraced reserves, or were notes, then you succumbed to false thinking. And it was a very expensive mistake. They even likened the weapon of words to something a little bit more hostile. Look what they compare it to. The weapon of words is more subtle and less immediately destructive than nuclear bombs. But just like the winds and the seas, which can hollow out the hardest rock, it has the power of eroding society. And boy, is our society eroded. How? By words. For instance, we go to our college-level economics textbook again, to page 237. And I'm going to cite from this page the only sentence that was not underlined by this college student. The only sentence that wasn't underlined. Two sentences, actually. There may be circumstances under which the Federal Reserve should try to affect economic activity, which, of course, we engage in 7 days a week, by influencing the public's, that's us, expectations. Where do your expectations lie? Right in here. They tamper with your psychology. They admit that in their books anyway. Although this is clearly a tricky and possibly even dangerous form of activity. Here's an economist, Mr. Warren Smith, who says they should do it, but it's dangerous. And they should do it to us, but it's dangerous. To the extent that it is employed, it should be divorced from actions designed to control bank reserves and should take advantage of the subtleties of everyday language. I thought that was worth underlining. What do you think? That was the only sentence on this page that this student didn't think was worth underlining. He underlined all the rest. Every last word. I don't like the idea of people taking words and taking advantage of them to my detriment. Word control is mind control is people control, and people control is totalitarian rule. Isn't that right? Does it dovetail in with economics, this subject that we're talking about tonight? Sure. We have here the 1980 annual report for the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, Virginia. And on the front cover we have a picture of John Maynard Keynes. Who knows that name? Okay. Keynes was an economist. In fact, he was an economist who helped get us into this mess. He sat at the right hand of FDR. And on page 6 we have the Federal Reserve quoting Keynes. His book, Economic Consequences of the Peace, which was written in 1919. Keynes is quoting another man by the name of Ulyanov. Sounds kind of Russian, doesn't it? So Ulyanov used an alias. Does anybody know what the alias was for Ulyanov? No, you got another guy there. That was Levy. Lenin. Lenin is said to have declared that the best way to destroy the capitalist system was to debauch the currency. Anybody ever watch that movie The Day After? That documentary? Piece of junk, huh? Lobbing ICBMs on Kansas. Oh boy. I don't know if you're from Kansas or not, and if you are, please forgive me, but what a godforsaken state. ICBMs lobbed on Kansas. Why would the Soviet Union bomb its own food supply? How are you going to invade a country if you destroy the grain belt of the United States and you can't put any Wheaties in the backpacks of those Russians who are going to invade this country? The best way to destroy the capitalist system was to debauch the currency, not lob ICBMs on it, and they've already destroyed this country. What we're going to try to do is see if we can put few pieces together and get it going again. Let's define the word money. Money has been defined by Ludwig von Mises, the Austrian economist, as, quote, the most vendible commodity. How many people knew that? I thought it was something new. We haven't gone very far. We've already went there. Money is the most vendible commodity. What's the problem in America? We have no vendible commodity being used as money today. Supposing I were to take a commodity, would you believe that a pen was a commodity? And supposing I decided I wanted to vend it. Supposing this gentleman here had a watch, and I said, well, Louis, I'd like to swap this pen for your watch. Would you trade? He says yes. He agrees to the parity, the exchange rate, that his watch and my pen are equal in value, psychological value. We trade. What have we done? Bartered, haven't we? He takes the pen, he finds another man over here who has a necktie, and he says, can I trade this pen for your necktie? And he says, yeah. So Louis trades with Don a pen and gets the necktie. What has happened now? Another barter transaction. But the pen was used in 2 or more transactions. The pen was used as the intermediate substance of 2 or more transactions. The pen was used as money. Or, if you want a long expression, the pen was used as the medium of exchange. Same thing. Can you use money as a medium of exchange? Impossible. Impossible. There's an economist in this book who says that money is used as a medium of exchange and nothing else. That is absurd. You couldn't use money as a medium of exchange if you tried. You know why? There's no such thing as money. How many people knew that? Either everybody's got bursitis in their shoulders. Or you got a lot of wax in your ears and you can't hear. You can see my mouth moving, but who reads lips? Anybody read lips? We'll get to that. There's no such thing as money. Have you ever seen a money? What's the specific gravity of money? What's the atomic number of money? What's the atomic number of money? There's no such thing as money. Nobody's ever seen a money. Nobody's ever tasted a money. Nobody's ever touched a money. Better still, it's an abstract term. You can use something as money, such as gold and silver. Gold and silver are not money. Gold and silver are metals. But you can use them as money. Who says? Section 11 of the Coinage Act, April 2nd, 1792, says gold and silver should be as money in the United States. They didn't say that gold and silver were money. They were used as money. If I said everybody here, deliver me a furniture tomorrow, what are you going to give me? A chair, a table, a lamp, a bed? Nobody could deliver me a furniture tomorrow morning. But you could deliver me something that is used as furniture. There's no such thing as a furniture. There's no such thing as a money. Throughout history, a lot of things have been used as money. Such as cows, moo. One of the difficult things about using cows as money is it's hard to make change for a cow. Supposing, for example, that Ray over here has 4 beautiful goats and I've got a cow. And I said, Ray, I'd like to trade my cow for your 4 goats. He agrees to the parity or the exchange ratio. But he only wants to give me 2 of his goats. Any mathematicians here? If 4 goats equals 1 cow, ergo prompto hoc, 2 goats must equal a half a cow. You see the problem? So Ray goes over to his shed, opens up the door, grabs his great big saw with his great big teeth, and he comes over to my cow and says, Ray, what are you going to do? He's going to make change. Not with mine, you know. Salt was used as money at one time. Does anybody here earn a salary? My gosh, I've been to more meetings and I've asked that question and there hasn't been a hand gone up. Nobody in America earns a salary anymore. What do you people do? Nobody earns a salary? Well, let's pretend you did. Let's pretend.
That's what I do.
That's all we do anyway in this country, is pretend. The word salary comes from the Latin word salarium. What does the word salarium mean? Salt. Roman soldiers back in the time of Christ were paid in salarium. Salt. Why would you want to get paid in salt? Because they didn't have refrigerators, for one thing. And a little bit of salt sprinkled on a piece of meat keeps it from spoiling, doesn't it? In fact, back on our Maine coast, we still have fishermen that'll flay a fish and put salt on it, and it'll keep it from spoiling. Jesus, the Christ, said to his disciples in Matthew 5:13, he says, ye are the salt of the earth. He didn't say you were the platinum or the gold or the silver. Why? Because salt holds back corruption. A few Christians sprinkled through a society, not just knowing the name of their Savior, but acting on the laws that He gave us, would keep society from going to hell in a handbasket. And when people tell me that 50% of the American people have had a born-again experience, I don't believe it. If that many people knew the author of that book, this country would not be in the mess it's in today. What other things have been used as money? Well, tea, tobacco. Where? Colonial Virginia. That's not too far away, not too long ago in history. What do you mean? People walking around the countryside with great big bales of tobacco? No. You grew the tobacco, deposited the tobacco in a tobacco bank. It's called a warehouse. You got a receipt for what you deposited. What was it called? A warehouse receipt. Or a certificate of deposit. Shortened to CD. You took the CD downtown, you saw a gentleman with a pair of shoes. You said, how much you want for the shoes? He said, like 50 pounds of tobacco. Well, not every housewife can carry 50-pound bales of tobacco around. So she just handed him a receipt for the tobacco, and he took the receipt to the warehouse, and he'd better find some tobacco with it, otherwise he's going to be a very ugly man. Of course, there's no tobacco in the barn anymore, and we don't have quite enough upset people yet, but there will be. Once they've lost their homes, they'll figure it out. What was being used as money in colonial Virginia? Tobacco. What was the receipt being used as? it was being used as if it were the tobacco. At law in the United States, there are only two substances declared to be as money, and that still holds at law. Those two substances were gold and silver in coin form. These were nothing more than receipts for the gold and silver that was on deposit. The receipts aren't being used as money. They're being used as a money surrogate, substitute, or proxy token, if you will. They're being used as if they were the money. But they aren't the money, and they never were the money. If you're going to use something as money, then it must exist. And by the way, what two substances have been used as money longer than any other substances in history? Gold and silver. For thousands of years. If you're going to use something as money, it must exist. See how smart we are in Maine? Really basic, huh? If it exists, it means it's a tangible. And a tangible is perceptible by one or more of the five human senses. You can see it, smell it, taste it, hear it, and touch it. Now that seems awfully basic, but the fact is, we're not using anything as money in the United States of America that can be seen, smelled, tasted, heard, or touched. How many knew that? How many knew that? Not just surmised it, but really knew it. I know this guy knows it. If you think we are, you identify what it is, and I will give you 1 pound of it absolutely free. Oh, you know, I got a CPA on a radio program. He was so flustered he didn't know what to do with it. We made that offer 3 times. And here's a guy who's going to try to help you with your money problems. And I'm offering him 1 pound of free money, and he couldn't even figure out what we're using as money. But that's just a CPA. What would he know about money? Darn little. Darn little. If you're going to use something as money, it must exist, and it would exist in one state or another, and there are only 3 states of existence. I did learn that at school. What are the 3 states of existence? It's either a gas, liquid, or a solid. But there is no gas, no liquid, or no solid being used as money in the United States of America, except in dollars and cents. But if you think there is, you tell me what it is, and I'll give you 1 pound of it absolutely free. At law, for public purposes, there are only 2 substances, and all we've got to do is to go down to our post office and read our Charters of Freedom, like we had on our post office wall in Calais, Maine. And it says in Article 1, Section 10, in Paragraph 1, no state. Are we in a state? This is Washington, isn't it? Is Washington a state? No state shall make anything but what? Gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. When was the last time the state of Washington paid any debts in gold or silver coin? Yeah, just about that far back. They might have been able to pay in silver up to 1965, although it's questionable as to how many of their bills they could have paid in that substance. I suspect that less than half of their bills could have been paid in that. We haven't been breaking the law too long, and we've got a presidential election coming up here pretty soon. And what's the president going to do? He's going to stand in front of the Chief Justice, and he's going to take an oath of office to uphold what? The Internal Revenue Code? Title 26? Or is he going to take an oath of office to uphold the United States Constitution? Every state violates it. Federal government violates it daily. Well, we had a biblical system of money. When our ancestors had built the tabernacle back in the desert, thousands of years ago, God had commanded them what they were going to make for offerings in the sanctuary. Exodus 25 and verse 3. And this is the offering which ye shall take of them, he says through Moses. Gold and silver and brass. What's the primary metal or element in brass? Copper? What was the monetary system of the United States up until 1933? Was it not gold and silver and brass? Just a coincidence that we were once a Christian nation, and we once used a scriptural monetary system. If we're going to use something as money, then we've got to have a means of expressing it. We've got to know how much we've got, how much we're going to pay out, and how much we're going to receive. Supposing we want to use concrete as money. be very bulky, but it probably wouldn't be much more absurd than using giant stone wheels. Stone wheels standing about yay high, maybe 6 feet, were used as money by the Yap Islanders in the Pacific. Now they rounded off the edges of these stones so they could kind of take their savings account around the island. That sounds like a very barbaric monetary system, doesn't it? But you know, they used that as money up until World War II. We haven't been out of the dark ages worldwide very long. In fact, I'm not so sure most of the world is yet out of it. If we use concrete as money, how would we express it so we know how much we had? Cubic yards. If we use milk as money, how would we express it? Quarts, gallons, and so forth. If we use lumber as money, how would we express it? Board feet. If we use money as money, how would we express it? Well, if you're going to weigh it, then you've got to figure out what money is. I've never seen any. If you use gold and silver as money, how would we express it? Okay, now we get several different answers, haven't we? We have 3 systems of weight measurement in the United States. Weight measurement. 3 systems, and I'm not counting metric. I have a natural aversion, and I can't figure out why. First off, we have the avoirdupois system. Everybody's familiar with that? In the avoirdupois system, when we go down to the supermarket to get a can of tuna, how many ounces to the avoirdupois pound? 16. Or 7,000 grains if you like to deal in grains. But if you go down to the butcher and you tell him you want 7,000 grains of Hamburg, he'll look at you very funny. But that would be a pound in the avoirdupois system. But we just don't use grains. We're not used to thinking in that sense. If we put something like gold and silver into shavings, bullion, bar, or dust form, we use a second system of weight measurement, what's called what? Troy. Troy. How many ounces to the Troy pound? 12. 1 for every month, 1 for every juror, or 1 for every tribe in Israel. When we put that gold and silver into coin form, we use a third system of weight measurement, which is called what? Dollars and cents. You weigh the coins in dollars. People say, hey, that coin's worth $1. No, it's not worth $1. It weighs $1. It's worth what you're willing to give up to get it. In fact, you might have to give up, if you wanted to get a $half coin that was made out of silver, you might have to give up several silver coins that were dollar weights to get it because it was a rare date. It still weighed $0.50, but it wasn't worth $0.50. It might have been worth to you $5 of silver to get a $half weight of silver. We'll cover that more later. If we were going to take a statutory approach, for example, and I'll only give you one statute, it would be Section 20 of the Coinage Act, April 2nd, 1792, which has not been rescinded. And other statutes were taken from it. Title 31 of the U.S. Code, Section 371, if there are any Pharisees or Sadducees here, or scribes, or whatever. It said, quote, the money of account of the United States. I'm going to stop there. What was the money of account of the United States at law? Gold and silver. Nobody's ever seen money, but you can see gold and silver. The money of account of the United States, which is gold and silver, shall be expressed in dollars or units. It didn't say that dollars were money. Dollars aren't money. Any more than ounces could be money. Dollars measured it. Comma, dimes, cents, hundreds, mills, thousands. You've heard of the mill rate? What's a mill? It's 1,000th of a dollar. I'll be there. Let's take a historical approach. We go to U.S. currency. Federal Reserve Board of Governors in Malfunction Junction. Where's that? Washington, D.C. Page 2. The choice of the dollar as the principal, back up. The United States became the first of a present community of nations to adopt the decimal system for its currency. How many percent to a whole? 100%. How many cents to the dollar? 100% to the dollar. In fact, Jefferson, on page 3, Thomas Jefferson is quoted here because Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton were the ones who gave us the dollar or the decimal system. If we hadn't had the decimal system, we'd be weighing coins in shillings, pence, pounds, and all those other funny things. He says the expediency of attending to the size of the money unit, Jefferson added, will be evident to anyone who will consider how inconvenient it would be to a manufacturer or merchant if instead of the yard, what's the dollar being equated with? Yards. If instead of the yard for measuring cloth, either the inch or the mile had been made the unit of measure. What was the dollar? It's a unit of measure. Have you ever seen a unit of measure? If I had a cup full of inches, could anybody tell me what they look like? How much does a cup full of inches weigh? If I throw a cup full of inches through that glass, can you hear it break? If I said I had a handful of dollars, could anybody describe them? You may think so. But a banker wrote back in 1903, the eye hath never seen, nor the hand touched a dollar. There ain't no such thing. Let's take a common sense approach. You got a handout sheet with you? One of these here? Let's look at page 1. And we will employ a very, very rare commodity. It's called common sense. Voltaire said that common sense isn't very common. It says here, if a tuna is a fish, wouldn't 100 tuna have to be 100 fish? Nobody's going to argue that, huh? Good. If a Ford is an automobile, wouldn't 100 Fords have to be 100 automobiles? Wouldn't it? If a lime is a piece of fruit, wouldn't 100 limes have to be 100 pieces of fruit? Nobody's going to argue that. If a dollar was a piece of paper, and isn't that what most people think it is? If you said, I want $1, what would you hand me? You'd hand me a piece of paper. If a dollar was a piece of paper, wouldn't $100 have to be 100 pieces of paper? Well, 3 years ago or so, we met a businessman in the Bahamas. On my vacations, I'm quite busy. Shooting my mouth off, get myself in trouble. This man had retired from a friendly ice cream franchise back in Massachusetts. It was a big franchise back then. He managed it. He had what people would call a $50 bill in his hands, and he was going to make an acquisition, not a purchase, because he couldn't buy anything with that. I said, that's not $50. He says, everybody knows that's $50. Well, I said, I just said it wasn't, so obviously not everybody knows that. Oh, he could have killed me. Sir, I said, if a tuna was a fish, wouldn't 50 tuna have to be 50 fish? Here's the answer. Quote, not necessarily. Why did he give me such an asinine response? Well, maybe you don't think it was. I think it's because he could anticipate the second question. And no way was he going to be made a fool out of on question number 2. So you know what he did? He beat me to it, and he made a fool of himself on question number 1. Some people do that. If land was used as money, and it was once in France, during the reign of Louis XIV, was it not? I think it was he, who issued assignat notes, French assignats, some call them assignats. Those were issued against confiscated land, church confiscated land. So the church land must have been used as money, and these were being used as the deeds, the claim checks, or the surrogates for the land. If land was used as money, it would be expressed in what? Quarts? Acres. If you wrote a deed for land, how would you express the deed? Quarts? Acres. But an acre is not a piece of paper. If milk was used as money, it would be expressed in quarts. If you wrote a receipt for milk, you'd express the receipt in quarts. But a quart is not a piece of paper. If you use gold and silver as money in the United States, and it once was, you would express it in what? Dollars and cents. That's how you weighed it. If you wrote a receipt for gold and silver, you would have to write the receipts in the same units of measure. But a dollar is not a piece of paper. Very simply, if this gentleman here had 1 acre of land, and this gentleman had 100 acres of land, I said, would you please bring your deeds down front? They bring them down, they look at them, Your Honor, I'd like to make an observation. but you may. The deeds are exactly the same size, 8.5 by 11. Well, of course, you dingbat, the deed is not the land. They're just denominated in acres. That's right. And the note is not the money. That is a deed or a claim check to a $1 quantity of money, and it's not there, it's someplace else. Some people think. This bottom one is a deed or a claim check to a $100 quantity of money, but it certainly isn't there. That's why it's no bigger than that one. At law, in the United States, we're to use two substances as money, gold and silver in coin form. The top row of coins I have here were gold coins minted by the United States Treasury until 1933. If you look at those coins, you see a very nice, satisfactory relationship between them. They look like measuring cups on our housewife's shelf. They make sense. The coin way to the left, you've got this on page 2 of your handout sheet. You can't see these. The coin way to the left weighed 25.8 grains. 90% pure. All coins in the United States, gold and silver, were minted 90% pure to give them enough hardness so they would withstand the jingling and the wear in your pockets. So they said. The next coin to its right weighed 2.5 times as much. The next coin to its right weighed 5 times as much. And the next coin weighed 10 times as much. Now I'm going to just stop right there for a moment and let you exercise your mind. If the coin way to the left here weighed 25.8 grains, how much does the one that weighs 10 times as much weigh? If this is 25.8, how much is that? 258. That's exactly what it was. And you check your coin books and you'll find that that was held accurate to, well, to within 3 places to the right of the decimal point, which is pretty close. Now, supposing this gentleman here had a portable color TV set and you wanted to sell it to me in gold. I said, how much do you want for that TV set? He says, I want 25.8 grains of 90% pure gold minted by the United States Treasury up until 1933. What are you trying to do, show off? What do you want? He says, I'd like to have $1 of gold. It's exactly the same thing. 25.8 grains was equal to $1. When you go out and run around the block, you might have run 5,280 feet, but how far did you really run? You ran a mile. It's the same thing. If the coin way to the left weighed $1 and the coin way to the right weighed 20 times as much, how much did that coin weigh? It weighed $20. I'm of the persuasion that better than 95% of the people in this country don't know that. They would tell you that it was worth $20. In fact, they'd tell you that that $20 coin was probably worth $500. That's like saying that 20 ounces is worth 500 ounces. That's absurd. But we speak that way all the time, and we give it no thought. If you drag a spike across one of those coins, you're guilty of an offense. And what would the average person say that you've just done to that coin? They would say that you defaced it. No, that wasn't exactly what you did. If you take a spray can of paint and you go into the men's room and you write something on the wall, you have defaced the wall. If you drag a spike across that coin, you have not defaced it, you have debased it. What's the difference? One harms the pretty picture. The other one reduces the bargained for consideration. It takes away some of the gold, doesn't it? That was a crime, and in fact the Coinage Act, which is still a law, said that if a Treasury official had been found debasing the coins, you know what the penalty was in Section 19? Death. Some people took this subject seriously. And it was a very serious subject. The bottom row of coins I have here were silver coins minted by the Treasury until 1935, the big one, the dollar weight, and 1964 was the last year for these other coins, except the one way to the left, which was only minted in the 1800s. The little tiny coin weighed how much? A half a dime. That's how much it weighed. It wasn't a nickel because it wasn't made out of nickel. It was made out of silver. It weighed half as much as the dime weighed. What people call a silver dime was not a silver dime. It was a dime weight of silver. It weighed a dime. A dime was a tenth of $1. And $1 is a unit of weight. The next coin weighed a quarter. It wasn't a silver quarter, it was a quarter of silver. It was a $quarter weight of silver. The next coin weighed a half a dollar of silver, and the coin way to the right weighed $1 of silver. You say, oh, I get a silver dollar here. No such thing. No such thing as a silver dollar. Have you ever seen a silver pound? How about a silver ounce? Have you ever seen a bread pound? A milk quart? How about if we turn it around and say, how about a quart of milk? Can you see that? Children's Bibles, and you may have seen some of these, but in some of the children's Bibles, they'll have pictures on the inside of the cover, and they'll show you little different objects that they used back in the Old Testament times. And down here in the corner, I've seen Bibles that would have a little silver disc, and they'd say that that little silver disc was a shekel. There's no such thing as a shekel. Shekels were units of weight measurement, and they weighed gold, silver, iron, brass. In fact, one of the kings even had his hair cut off, and they weighed his hair in shekels. There's no such thing as a silver shekel. But there is such a thing as a shekel of silver. But you see, these pages here were not inspired by God. But if they had read Numbers chapter 7, it would have been crystal clear that a shekel is a unit of weight. I won't get into that, though. If I hit too much scripture with this group, somebody's liable to think I'm going to take up a collection. And I promise there won't even be an altar call. So rest easy. We have a slight problem when we use both systems together, and here's the problem I want to point out to you that most people don't point out in the Patriot movement, for example. We have a coin here that's $1 weight of silver, and we have a coin here that is a $1 weight of gold. The silver coin is 16 times heavier than the gold coin. There is a scriptural, I believe, a scriptural no-no. Why did they make the silver coin 16 times heavier than the gold coin? Well, you dummy, don't you know? Silver isn't as valuable as gold. Oh, I suspected that. Let me show you how absurd that was. At least I think it was. Supposing this man came into my supermarket and he wanted to get a pound of sugar. This man comes into my supermarket and he wants to get a pound of salt. Sugar is more valuable than salt, right? Sugar is more costly. He gets a pound bag of sugar, and it's a little bitty bag. This man gets a pound bag of salt, it's a great big bag. They both come to the checkout counter, and the guy with the sugar says, "What's this here anyway?" That's what's the problem. He says, "I got a little bitty bag and it says a pound." He's got a great big bag and it says a pound. I said, "Don't you know? Sugar is more valuable than salt. Therefore, a pound of sugar is 1 ounce, and a pound of salt is 16 ounces. Do you have any idea what it would be like to go shopping in a supermarket like that? The Bible tells us in Deuteronomy chapter 25, for instance, 13 through 15, we can take 10 references, one will do, I think, if you want to do a Bible study on this subject. Thou shalt not have in thy bag a weight, a large, and a small. Now I'm giving a generous application to this, but I think it applies. Thou shalt not have in thy house a measure, a large and a small, but thou shalt have a perfect and just measure, that thy days may be prolonged in the land which Yahweh, YHWH, the Hebrew tetragrammaton, that's what Lord is, capital, God, giveth thee. Within each system we had just weights and measures. When we used both of them together, I suspect that we didn't. What I'm suggesting to you folks is that that coin and this coin should have been the same weight. It may have taken 16 silver coins to get a gold coin, but that's beside the point. They should both weigh the same. You should not have a system of weights and measures for one metal and a different system of weights and measures for another metal and use the same term, dollar and cents. That's all I'm saying. What do we use today in America? That's our just weights and measures, aren't you pleased? Now you don't have to be a genius in economics and have to go to Harvard and study economics for 4 years to figure out that there's something not quite cricket about that arrangement. And we can save you about $8,000 a year or so, or whatever it costs to go to that place now. Maybe it's more than that, probably more like 10 or 12. My question would be, why is it that the Susan B. Agony Super Quarter, which is only 50% heavier than what people call a quarter, made of exactly the same metal and composition, why is it that it's only 50% heavier and it gets you 400% as much downtown?
Nobody's ever given me a reason. You know why? I'll bet you it's because there isn't one. Why is it that the coin that people call a dime contains less copper and nickel than the nickel does, and the nickel only gets you half as much? Nobody can tell me that either. Why is it that the penny, by the way, all of these coins up until 1981 were what, 95% copper, weren't they? Total composition. The outside composition of our clad coins is what? 75% nickel and 25% copper. The inside core is 100% copper. There ain't no silver in them. Had a little old lady come into our store one day. She says, "Do you take silver?" "You bet I do." And she hands me a fistful of Susan B. Agonies. "Ma'am," I said, there isn't even a trace of silver in those coins." She didn't know that. Why is it that the $half-dollar coin gets you only half as much, but it contains an awful lot more of the same metal as the dollar coin? In fact, my wife and I came out of Maine back in January, I guess, of '83. We hit a toll booth. Well, not head-on. We kind of slid by it because you don't want to hit them head-on. Stopped. The toll was $1.55. Now, the man in there was probably Ray's age. 39. Yeah, right. We hand him an agony coin, a $half-dollar coin, and we hand him 5 of the new lightweight pennies. What are the new lightweight? How come the new lightweight pennies go plunk and the older ones went fling? Have you noticed that? Yeah, the new ones are made out of zinc, aren't they? Well, they look like copper. Yeah. You can scrape that right off. It's just a little veneer. In fact, that's about all our world is nowadays, just nothing but a veneer. You scratch that off and it's real silvery looking underneath. Oh, it's silver. No, it's not. It's zinc. You leave it around in a moist environment and it'll turn black. We hand him one of these big coins, we hand him a giant coin, and we hand him 5 of these new slug pennies. Adds up to $1.55. He's saying that's $1.55. I said, "Yes, sir." He says, $1.55. Yeah, yes, sir. He says, "What is this coin, $1?" I said, "No, sir, that's the $half-dollar. The dollar coin is the small one." He had never seen those 2 coins in juxtaposition before to realize that a dollar coin is much smaller than a $half-dollar. But you know something? As soon as he read the superinscription on those coins, he believed. There's one born every minute. In fact, probably about 2 or 3. If you wanted to take a $1 Fed note, those little greenies we carry in our pocket, downtown to invest in some copper, and you tell the girl at the bank, "I'd like to have one of those Susan B. Anthony coins," how much copper and nickel do you get? 3/10 of an ounce. Next day, you get down to the bank, "I'd like to have 4 of those quarters." Adds up to $1. We take those and put them on our scales. How much do we get now? 8/10 of an ounce. Next day, we get down to the bank, "I'd like to have $1 in nickels." 3.6 ounces. Next day, we get down to the bank, "I'd like to have pennies, the 1981 and earlier." I want the ones that made out of copper. 100 pennies on the scale tips out at about 3/4 of a pound. The Bible says, "Thou shalt not have in thy bag a weight, a large and a small." No, we haven't even gone over $1 yet, and we've got 4. And if we want to get this country back, we've got to go back to just weights and measures, because the laws of God were not abrogated. If you were going to invest in copper, which one of these coins would you get? This one over here, or the 1981 and earlier penny? The penny! Why, Spotlight newspaper told people you ought to go out and get pennies. Here's a day at the Fed, Federal Reserve Bank of New York. This is the central bank of the 12. The other 11 banks merely write books and clear checks. The New York Fed is the central bank of the United States. Page 9. The constant drain of pennies presents a mystery to the coin section. This is the monetary authority of the United States, and they couldn't figure out where the pennies were going. Exactly why they disappear or where is anyone's guess. Anybody here want to guess? My wife and I had 5-gallon buckets full of them. We didn't have them all. But it said here that the New York Fed alone had to put 50 million new pennies into circulation every month to keep up with the drain. 50 million a month. Have you ever tried to pick up a 5-gallon pail of pennies? Somebody runs into your place and says, "The economy just collapsed today." What does an economy look like? I've never seen one. Inflated or collapsed. But you say, "Oh my gosh, this is terrible." You run down into the cellar and you grab your 2 5-gallon buckets of pennies, and I don't care if you are the strongest man in town. Those buckets aren't going anyplace. The handles maybe, but the buckets stay right there.
Copper is a terrible investment. It's maybe better than monetized debt, but not much better. A couple rolls of silver coins and maybe a roll of gold coins and you're on your way. Copper is terrible. I wouldn't recommend it, but I'm not here to make recommendations anyway. Well, invariably, what people who discover that there's been a fraud do is they grab some of these bills and they start showing people some of the changes made on bills. So let's find out where bills came from. These things didn't come out of heaven. God didn't command that our forefathers, for example, make offerings at the tabernacle in so many Federal Reserve notes, U.S. Notes, silver certificates, or gold certificates. Where did these things come from? I go to the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. It's called Your Money in the Federal Reserve System. Page 4. If you read and understand, when we come out of school, we know how to read. We generally don't know how to understand. But if you can read this short text and understand it, you will learn the origin of banking, inflation, and what people call erroneously paper money. It doesn't take very long to read it, but it takes a little while to understand it. Let's give it a whirl. They tell us here that modern day banking probably had its origin in England. Some people argue with that, but that's all right, so what? Goldsmiths stored gold and coins for customers as a sideline to their principal trade. Goldsmith was a predecessor to bankers. Before there was a banker, there was a goldsmith, but they're the same guy. They accepted gold and coins, brought them into safekeeping, and they gave or issued receipt for the amount. What's wrong with that? This man deposits a gold coin with honest Bruno in Jerusalem, because he figures that honest Bruno can take care of his gold coin better than he can. Did anybody here get a bank account? Who here has a bank account? Checking or safe? Oh, come on. I know you're here. You hand somebody a stack of $100 Fed notes, and you just about panic. The first thing that any businessman does, you know what he does? He takes it to where it'll be safe. He takes it downtown to the bank. Oh, boy. Because, you see, we believe that a third party could take care of our property better than we could. How many people here have furniture at home? Don't you have furniture at home? Why don't you take it down to the bank so it'll be safe? Why don't you deposit your car down there? I'll tell you why, because if you took it down there and deposited it, within a few years, the banker would steal it. You know what he'd do? He would have you sitting and sleeping on receipts for furniture. And you'd probably try to do it. A couple more generations and we'll have people sleeping on receipts for beds. And they'll be calling those receipts beds. This man deposits a gold coin with me, honest Bruno, and he takes a receipt, a warehouse receipt, if you will, or a bank receipt. He goes across town, but it's Memorial Day here in Jerusalem, long weekend, and he wants to buy something, a wood stove. Jerusalem. He says, how much do you want for the wood stove? He says, I'd have $1 of gold. So he hands him a receipt. Gee, I said, I don't want a piece of paper. Oh, he says, you can trust this piece of paper. It says it's a promise to pay the gold, and you just take that receipt over to honest Bruno, and he'll give you the gold. Now, if he doesn't, well, you just sue us all in the Sanhedrin and see where he gets you. What could be wrong with that? We do it all the time. We pass these things around as if they were the gold, don't we? In time, depositors of gold, here's my depositor in this illustration, found they could settle debts by transferring gold receipts instead of gold itself. That's what we've done. Goldsmith, that's me, honest Bruno, discovered that part of the money left with them was never withdrawn. What was the money? That or the gold? The gold. What would you do when the Bible says that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God? There's none righteous, no, not one. The heart of man is deceitful and desperately wicked above all things. What would you do, sinner, if you had a room full of gold coins that didn't belong to you, but nobody came after them? And you just sat there and collected dust. What a waste to our society. Why, that could be working for our community. We could build new synagogues. They could loan it to other persons who would repay later with interest.
Another scriptural note, the Bible forbids interest. Not a lot of interest, it forbids interest on loans. Usury was interest in Old English law, not a lot of it. We'll cover that later. This man deposits a gold coin. I give him a receipt. He spends the receipt. Question to the audience, how many purchasing units are in circulation? Wow. The receipt is being used as if it was the gold, and everybody's going to treat it as though it was a purchasing unit. So yes, there is one purchasing unit in circulation. Watch what happens now. He has deposited, get the receipt. This man is my borrower. He traipses in, he says, I'd like to borrow the gold coin. I loan him the gold coin, just like they said right here. And he goes out and spends it in the marketplace. My next question is, folks, how many purchasing units in the marketplace now? 2. What happens to the price of Skippy peanut butter, both crunchy and smooth, when you double the number of purchasing units in the marketplace? Do the prices go down, stay the same, or do we have a phenomena which people today call inflation? Isn't that neat? But you know, it didn't stop there, did it? It says here that furthermore, the borrowers found it convenient, here's my borrower over here, he found it convenient to accept receipts for the amount of his loan rather than the actual gold. Why, of course, if the depositor is willing to trust my receipt, why can't I get the borrower to trust the receipt? Oh, you don't want to borrow those heavy gold coins? That barbaric metal? Why, don't wear out your pockets. Heavy. Take one of my convenient, lightweight receipts. We have 2 receipts in the marketplace being used against the same gold coin, and who kept the gold coin? Honest Bruno. Have you ever noticed that you've never seen a shabby-looking bank? The most beautiful buildings in town. We're told in the Scriptures in Deuteronomy 19:15, for example, by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall every fact be established. So let's go to a second witness. The Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. Modern Money Mechanics, page 3. Banks can build up deposits by increasing loans. Now, you know, I bet you a lot of people could read that and say, gee, sort of. Well, I'm simple. I know what a deposit looks like, don't you? I was raised, in a rural state, and I've seen deposits out behind the barn. They stand about that high. Now, if your neighbor comes and says, I'd like to borrow some of that deposit from you, does the deposit increase, stay the same, or does it go down? It's going to go down. But that's not what it says here. It says that banks can build up deposits by increasing loans. Loans of what? The deposit? If they loaned the deposit, it would go down. Which banks are we talking about? Just the Federal Reserve Bank? Or are we talking about banks right here in downtown Walla Walla? This unique attribute of the banking business was discovered. How many bankers in the house? Anybody here a banker or work in a bank? Funny, you can never seem to get those people to come to these meetings. This unique attribute of the banking business was discovered several centuries ago. Who do you suppose discovered it? The depositor, the borrower, or the banker? Yeah. At one time, bankers were merely middlemen. At one time. They made a profit by accepting gold and coins brought to them for safekeeping and lending them to borrowers. You know, the average person still thinks that's what they do. They think a little old lady goes down to your local bank, deposits some of these things at one window, and somebody else goes to the other window and borrows those things. There is no connection. Local banks are not in the business of loaning Federal Reserve notes. Sometimes you can get them. What do local banks do? They write checkbook balances, a number on one of their pieces of paper, and that's what they lend you, isn't it? They don't lend Federal Reserve notes. Only the Federal Reserve loans those. They soon found that the receipts they issued to depositors were being used as a means of payment. There's our second witness. These receipts were acceptable as money since whoever held them could go to the banker and exchange them for metallic money. What was the metallic money? Gold and silver. Then bankers discovered that they could make loans merely by giving borrowers their promises to pay. Brackets, banknotes. How many were taught in school at any level that banks only pretend to make loans? How many learned that in school? Nobody learned that in school. Now, you know, I think that that's something that you ought to know. Don't you? Can you imagine going down to the man at the Avis counter and say, I'd like to rent a new car? He says, what kind of a car do you recommend? A new K car, kosher, or whatever it means there. He gives me the keys and the rental agreement. I go out into the parking lot, I see all these signs that say reserve for Avis, reserve for Avis, reserve for Avis, but there's no cars. So I run back in, I said, excuse me, I said, there's a problem. I said, I can't find a car. Oh, he says, there isn't one. What do you mean there isn't one? I got to catch a flight out of Portland. You promised to loan me a car. He said, that's right, that's what we loaned you. You loaned me what? He says, we loaned you the promise. You see, he says, we found it was a lot cheaper this way. Yeah, I guess they would be. Bankers discovered that they could make loans merely by giving borrowers their promises to pay. In other words, all they do is make a promise to make the loan, but they never make the loan. Do you know something? Maybe you already knew it. If you're rich doing that. If you could do that, since there isn't anybody here who is a banker, you could have title to everybody's property in this town. Couldn't you? In fact, you could even have title to the town and let the town office pledge your property as collateral against the town loans that the town never got from the bank that never made the loan. You could get very rich doing that, and you'd have a very nice-looking bank at the same time. And you'd have a lot of pretty girls that work for you, and they'd smile, and when you start talking about this, they say, I'd rather not know. You know why they'd rather not know? Because they're afraid their conscience is going to bother them. In this way, it says, banks began to create money. Actually, banks don't create money. You know who creates money? You do. If a banker writes a number on a piece of paper and you think it's money, you've just created it right there. All he did was write a bad check. You did the rest. And you'll keep doing it for a while. It says here, more notes could be issued than the gold and coin on hand. What was a note? It was an absolute and unconditional promise to pay money, wasn't it? More unconditional and absolute promises to pay money could be issued than there was money. Why? Because only a portion of the notes outstanding would be presented for payment at any one time. Is that honest? You're all bored, right? You all knew it, right? Okay. Can't tell you anything new. Well, we'll take a look at page 3 of our handout sheet. Look at the 4 $10 bills. We don't do this for the benefit of those people who've been through this issue many, many times. Although, who knows, there might be something in there that they hadn't thought of. I don't know. We do this primarily because there are people who are 75 and 80 years of age who handled every one of these bills we're going to look at and never noticed that there were changes in the wording of the bill. We could have gone back in time to 1776 or 1778, which is one of the notes I have in my collection, and we could look at the Continental notes, which I have here. The Continental notes were issued by the Continental Congress. We studied that in our early American history, didn't we? How they issued these Continental notes and they became worthless. So worthless that the late Merrill Jenkins discovered. Raise your hand if you learned this in your history book. That a haircut in the mid-1700s could cost $750. That a tavern owner could acquire a keg of whiskey in these things for $8,000 and sell the empty barrel back to his supplier and get $12,000 for the empty barrel. You all learned that in history school, right? History, yeah. I did do that. Or we could look at the second, the first unconstitutional issue. We could look at the U.S. notes. We'll cover that a little bit later on. Almost the same problem with those. What we did, we just went back to the 1928 series Federal Reserve note, basically the same kind of notes that we use today. But back in those days, they had a contract on the note, and the contract was only 14 words long. Now, most people who handled these notes back in the 1920s never knew there was a contract on the note. The reason I suspect they didn't is because that 1/3 of the contract was written on top of the portrait or picture. 2/3 of the contract was written underneath the portrait. That breaks up the continuity of a sentence. And it simply said, the United States of America, and on the bottom of the portrait, the sentence was completed, will pay to the bearer on demand $10. Now, a couple of years ago, I had breakfast with a Federal Reserve agent, Mr. Wolf. We spent an hour and a half together, covered a lot of good stuff. And I asked him, just out of curiosity, I said, if that says it promises to pay $10, and that's like promising to pay 10 ounces. 10 ounces of what? 10 gallons. 10 gallons of what? It's an incomplete contract right now. I said, if that promises to pay $10, can that piece of paper in and of itself be $10? Well, he says, no. Of course not. It's only one piece of paper. How could it be 10 of anything? Well, what is it going to pay you $10 of? We have to finish off the contract by reading the fine print to the left of the portrait. And the top line to the left of the portrait says that this is redeemable in what? Gold. We'll stop there. We could do a little bit of study on the remainder, but we won't bother going to it for lack of time. Redeemable in gold. How much gold were you going to get for that piece of paper? 258 grains. Grains. Right. And a lot of people would say, well, you're going to get $10 worth. No, you're not going to get $10 worth. You're going to get a $10 weight. 258 grains. How many people here knew for a fact and could substantiate it? When they raised their hand, I'm not going to ask you to, but how many people here know for a fact and could substantiate with a figure that this Federal Reserve note that we're looking at here was not, in fact, Federal Reserve notes were never redeemable in gold? How many people knew that? Oh, good. We got a new piece of information. It says it's redeemable, doesn't it? What does redeemable mean? It means that that will buy back or will be bought back by a substance at par. Yes, the Federal Reserve tells us in one of the little publications entitled, I Bet You Thought. I thought a lot of things. Let's see. Page 29. New York Federal Reserve says, quote, when the Federal Reserve was established, Congress required the Federal Reserve to back their currency with 40% gold and 100% eligible paper. What's eligible paper? Well, they tell us. Short-term IOUs of businessmen and farmers. These were backed with 40% gold and 100% IOUs. Were they 140% backed? Who runs a checking account and has it 140% backed? What is a note by definition? It's an IOU. 100% of the Federal Reserve note IOUs were backed by IOUs. That's pretty good. I'd like to do that. And 40% of them could claim gold. Is that honest? No. And you couldn't get away with that. How do we do that? Well, let's suppose we start an airline and we sell 100 tickets. The people go down with the tickets to the gate, and the gate attendant lets the first 40 people on the airplane, but he turns the next 60 of us away. Being one of the 60, I get a little bit upset, a little dismayed. I said, what gives here anyway? Well, he says we were overbooked. I guess you did. You turned away more people than you let on the plane. Yeah, he says we did. How many tickets did you sell? 100. How many seats on the airplane? 40. You fool, you're going to have to refund 60 tickets. No, sir, he says, those are non-refundable tickets. How's business? Fantastic. So that's exactly what Congress authorized the Federal Reserve to do, and my grandparents accepted each one of those notes as if they were all good, and gave up their sweat to get many, many notes that weren't. I'd like to be on the issuing side of that proposition. I could have the largest banks in town. In fact, I'd have Federal Reserve banks that were 25 stories above ground and 5 stories underground. What do you bet? And if you think the Federal Reserve paid for their banks, you tell me what they paid in to get those banks, and I'll give you a pound of that absolutely free. It's a good business to be in. Starting in 1934, after our first, or I should say second planned depression, we had one in 1920, we had another one in 1929, which was a little bit bigger. They issued a second series note because they outlawed the ownership of gold, or at least they said they did. It was House Joint Resolution 192. Now people are debating that, whether or not it's been rescinded and so forth. But it was against public policy during the Roosevelt administration for the American people to pay the debts in gold. So they changed the note, so we have a 1934 series note, because you've got to take away the gold, you've got to take away the gold notes. So they now have the same contract. The United States of America will pay to the bearer on demand $10. But the fine print to the left of the portrait was changed just a little bit. It says now this note is legal tender. It doesn't say this money is legal tender. Federal Reserve notes never purport to be money. They don't say this cash, this currency. They say this note is legal tender and is redeemable in what? Lawful money. Now why do they use the word legal on one line and the word lawful on another line? Why didn't they say that this is lawful, this is a lawful note payable in lawful money, a lawful note payable in legal money? Or why did they just say this is legal tender payable in legal money? Okay. Well, we'll take a, we'll hone that down just a shade more. Black's Law Dictionary tells us under the word legal that legal merely contemplates the form of law. The lawful contemplates the substance of law. Which do you think would govern? Form governing over substance, or do you think substance governs over form? Substance must govern over form. It's the substance we're after. Things can look like they're lawful, but they might only be legal. That which is lawful had best be legal. That which is legal is not necessarily lawful. It only appears that way. And probably most of our statutes are merely legal, and they're probably not lawful. If it says this note is legal tender, what is that saying? Legal, form of law. Tender is a verb to offer. It is a formalistic or form of law offer to pay the money. It doesn't say that it is the money. It says that we're going to offer to pay the money. If you want to bother come and get it, fine. If you don't, that's fine too. What's the lawful money? In fact, I asked the Federal Reserve agent, if this is redeemable in lawful money, can this piece of paper in and of itself be lawful money? And he says, no. Well, he's right. So I said, well, what's lawful money? He said, I don't know. Well, the man is in his early 50s. But so far as I know, there's only one place in the United States Code, which used to, I guess they modified it a year ago, tell us what lawful money was. So we typed it in on the margin for you, so you could look it up if you want to go to a law library. Title 12 of the United States Code. Section 152 says, quote, the term lawful money or lawful money of the United States should be construed to mean gold or silver coin of the United States. But you couldn't get gold. Why? Because here's the law if you own it. So what are you going to get for that second note? Silver. That's when people thought we went off a gold standard and they thought we went on a silver standard. We were never on a gold standard and we were never on a silver standard. Just define what it means. We were never on either one. We were mostly on a debt standard. We had a little gold and silver circulated around, but throughout our history, we've never been on a gold standard, to my knowledge. In 1945, Congress authorized the private corporation called the Federal Reserve. We realize it's a private corporation, not anything to do with the federal government, to reduce the reserve requirement against their IOUs from 40% down to 25%. Wouldn't you like to open up a checking account at my bank? You put $25 in your account, and I'll let you write a check for $100, and I, the banker, will clear the full amount. Would you like that? He's nodding his head. He thinks that's a good deal. That's exactly what Congress authorized the Federal Reserve to do. All they had to do is put $25 of the substance in the account, and they could write notes for $100. And the Fed will clear their own checks and their own notes. You know you can get rich doing that. 1950, the third note down, you notice that the contract is the same, but the fine print to the left of the portrait was shrunk from 4 lines down to 3 lines, but it reads verbatim on the 1950 series note exactly what the 1934 series note. Now I asked the guy from the Fed, Mr. Wolf, I said, what are you trying to do, save ink? Or were they getting ready to do what they did the day after someone met an unfortunate and untimely checkout time? The year was 1963. Please forgive the 1977 date down there. I didn't happen to have a 63 series note with me when I had these things made up. In 1963, the Federal Reserve made a slight alteration again to the note, and you'll notice that underneath the portrait they eliminated a little bitty line that said, "We'll pay to the bearer on demand." Just, they were going to save some more ink. And the fine print to the left of the portrait got changed just a little bit. They went a little bit larger this time. Apparently they found the old dies. And they said, "This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private, period." What happened the day before they did this? A fellow by the name of John Fitzgerald Kennedy checked out. And what were we busy doing? Looking at the things that came across the bank counter? No, we were busy watching that electronic campfire. And the Federal Reserve began issuing, just coincidentally, of course, everything's by coincidence in this world, new notes. John Maynard Keynes had quoted Lenin, and he said that the best way to destroy the capitalist system was to debauch the currency. The top note was supposed to be redeemable in gold. The second and third note was supposed to be redeemable in silver. What's the bottom note redeemable in? No thing. Has the currency been debauched, and if so, by what percentage? 100%. These things us menfolk call bills. We would say that that's a $10 bill. What kind of a bill is it besides a $10 bill? Why do they call it a $10 William? Why is it a $10 bill? Where's the word bill come from? It is a bill of credit. That's where the word bill comes from. What's a bill of credit? It's defined in the law dictionaries as being a promise to pay the money. That's all. Can a promise to pay the money beat the money? No. Can a promise to pay a steak be a steak? How full will you get eating a promise to pay a steak? Not two. We have a problem with bills of credit. How many people here have read Sheldon Emery's book, Billions for Bankers and Debts for the People? Oh my God. I have to confess, I read it too. The worst confession I have to make is I gave away 500 copies of it, and I've been kicking myself ever since. In fact, that's why I wrote my first book called Creditors' Debt of Slavery. How many people have read that book? 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, that's better than I thought. This book is atrocious. It almost starts off good, and boy, it goes to pot bad. And very quickly. I'm going to have to address that issue too. These are bills of credit, and bills of credit are unlawful. Anybody going to deny that? Bills of credit are unlawful. Why? Article 1, Section 8, and Paragraph 5 of the United States Constitution grants Congress certain powers. The power to coin money. Can you coin those? Can you coin silver certificates? Can you coin gold certificates? Can you coin United States notes? Or do you print them? They were given the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof. What did that mean? Did that mean that they could take the gold out of the coin? They could try to whittle away at the gold, and they could take a little bit of the gold out of the coin. Pretty soon there would be no gold in the coin. They could take some of the silver out of the coin. Pretty soon there would be no silver in the coin. That the Congress can declare anything it wants to be money. Is that what that meant? Black's Law Dictionary. How many people looked up the word value in Black's Law Dictionary? Look it up. Under the word value in the 5th edition, it tells us to regulate the value meant the composition of the coin. It meant that they had to regulate the composition. What did that mean? Oh, the coins had to come out 90% pure. You couldn't have some 86%, some 92%, some 95%, and they all had to weigh so many grains per dollar weight. They all had to come out the same. It was not a psychological concept. It was an objective value, not a psychological value. Well, there are people who say, well gosh, we can emit gold certificates, couldn't we? Those were unlawful. In fact, gold certificates were issued in the year 1863, and they had been preceded in the year before that, 1862, by what was called the Lincoln Greenback, and I've heard people call that the first constitutional money. That is absurd. In fact, that was the first time that Congress dared to violate the Constitution. Just the opposite. Is that right? United States notes were legal tender notes. Gold certificates were legal tender notes. This certificate is a legal tender. You know, legal tender was prohibited by law. I go to a book, 1903. It's called Contest for Sound Money by A. Barton Hepburn, ex-comptroller of the currency for the United States, superintendent of banking for the state of New York, chairman of Chase National Bank before it merged with Manhattan and became Chase Manhattan. And on page 60 and 61, he talks about the old Continental notes. Remember those $750 for a haircut notes? Our forefathers went through that. Why? Because the Continental Congress had been given the power to coin money and emit bills. It was written. They could do it. They proposed, let them do it after the Constitutional Convention. And at the Constitutional Convention, they said, no, we've been through that before. And the words, and emit bills, just three little words, were stricken out by a vote of 4 to 1. The words were stricken out by a vote of 4 to 1, and unquestionably, the convention intended to withhold from the federal government the power to create paper money with legal tender attributes. What about U.S. notes? No. How about silver certificates? No. How about gold certificates? No. Well, gold certificates were honest, weren't they? No. Page 418. At first, gold certificates were permitted to be issued in excess of gold deposited. How do you know how much gold there is deposited? We have no way of challenging every note in circulation at the same time. Well, the U.S. notes, they were lawful. No, they weren't. Page 419. Relying upon the opinions expressed in debate, it is safe to assert that Congress believed the Legal Tender Act of 1862, this is the Greenbacks, unconstitutional when they voted that it become a law. Can an unconstitutional law be a law? I'd like to think that we close the book on that, but somebody's going to walk out of this meeting and say, well, that guy was about 85% right, but 15% of that was speculation. U.S. notes for Constitution. Hogwash. We're going to go to Sheldon Emery. I have nothing against the man, but I got a lot against the book. Primarily because I gave away 500 copies of it myself. And I got to do something about that. Page 17, we're already into solutions. Doesn't take very long to describe the problem, does it? Only 16 pages and you get the problem already figured out. Page 17, we're going to give you a solution. The constitutional way. If we would have used the constitutional way of creating, he puts that in quotation marks, the money. Anybody got a constitution that says your government can create money? I don't have that in my constitution. Joyce Kilmer said in the poem called Trees, only God can create a tree. Man can't create anything. All he does is transform one thing, a resource, into wealth. But he doesn't create anything. The federal Congress would spend most of its time in study on the issuance and control of an adequate supply of stable money. People, this is very important. You must understand. This is a proposition made by many, many, many people in what we call the freedom movement. I'm going to quote people like the name of Peter Cook. Anybody heard the name? Nobody's ever heard the name Peter Cook? Parche, who's written articles in the Spotlight. How about the guy who's at the Freeman Institute by the name of Cleon Skousen? Anybody know that name? Sure. Sheldon Emery. Everybody knows that name. Eustace Mullins, who wrote the Federal Reserve Conspiracy. A very nice book to tell you who created the conspiracy. Suggests that Congress has the power to create money. Holy mackerel. Holy mackerel. Holy mackerel, Andy. Oh, that's all the money off. Congress, he wants to control the volume of money. Anybody who's read that book, this book here, anybody deny? Isn't that what Sheldon Emery says? Congress is to control the volume of money. To establish an adequate supply of money. And that's to control the volume, is that not? I'm not trying to stretch it. Page 28. He cites the very reason himself why that is not to be done. President James Garfield. Top quote. James Garfield said that whoever controls the volume of money in any country is what? Nobody remembers that one. absolute master of all industry and commerce. I'm going to go back to page 17. The author of this book suggests that Congress be the absolute master of all industry and commerce. Now, my understanding is that Congress is our servant. A servant can't be the master, can he? A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways, as we're told in James 1:8. Congress does not have the power to print. In fact, he uses the word print. Congress should have the power. He says Congress would authorize the coining. In brackets he says i.e. printing. Is the word coin and print, are those synonymous? Is that book coined or is that book printed? You either all lost your vocal cords, you all lost your arms, you all lost your hearing, or you all went to sleep. I can't figure out which it is. Now, there are those who would suggest that Congress has the power to issue money. The power to issue was never delegated to anyone. Watch carefully the words in those books. The power to issue was never delegated. I had a publisher print these books. Is the power to print synonymous with the power to issue my books, or is the publisher beholden to give me the books and let me do the issuing? I issue the books. How did we issue the gold and silver? If you didn't think there was enough of it in circulation, you went out and you mined some of it. You took the ore to the treasury, you told them to stamp it into coin form of known weight and purity, regulated. They gave you the coin back and they took 1/2 of 1% of that metal. That was their seigniorage prerogative or markup, if you will. That was authorized by the Coinage Act. You took the coin and went out and you were the first spender of that coin. What did that make you? It made you the issuer. Why? Because whoever has the power to control the volume of money is the absolute master of all industry and commerce, and that power was held by we the people, and it was never given to the government. But yet people seem to think that all we can do is to nationalize the Federal Reserve, have Congress do to us what the Fed is doing, and that somehow theft becomes legal. Wow. Why are bills of credit unlawful? Modern Money Mechanics, page 3. Intrinsically, a dollar bill is just a piece of paper. If a dollar bill is just a piece of paper, it wouldn't cost too much to print it, would it? How much does it cost to print a $1 bill? 2 cents? We go to the Treasury. This is a Treasury brochure. It's called The Dollar of the Future. Susan B. Anthony. They don't even make them anymore, do they? Sort of like the Falcon Futura. Discontinued model. The $1 bill costs nearly 2 cents to produce. How many people here get $1 bills for nearly 2 cents? Nobody. If you give 100 cents of your labor to get a $1 bill, and the Treasury says that they only pay 2 cents to get it, who gets the other 98 cents? It's a pretty profitable business, isn't it? If it costs, and I use the word if it costs 2 cents to print a $1 bill, how much does it cost to print a $100 bill? Okay. Now, I got a telephone call 2 years ago from Mr. Robert Stevens, room 705-13A, Bureau of Engraving and Printing. We talked for 45 minutes, and during that period of time, he says, we get $100 bills for the same price. I said, I know that. There's no more paper, no more ink, and no more labor in a $100 bill than there is in a one. If it costs 2 full cents to print a $100 bill, what is the percentage of markup? Would you accept the figure 500,000%? If you made 500,000% markup on what you put into the marketplace, would you be worried about balancing your budget? The federal government operates on a balanced budget. How many people knew that? You didn't hear that on Barbara Walters, did you? You heard it first here and down, Walla Walla. The federal government operates on a balanced budget. It collects no money from you, and it spends no money, nor does it waste any. Zero in and zero out is a balanced budget. Is my math correct? Now, if you think the government collects money, spends money, and wastes money. You identify what that money is that the government collects, spends, and wastes. That's expressed in dollars and cents, and I'll give you a pound of it absolutely free. You're going to get so sick of that offer. You're going to walk away here tonight and say, that guy offered me a pound of free money, and I couldn't figure I could have gotten out of debt. Couldn't figure out what it was, because there's nothing. It doesn't cost 2 cents of anything to print a $1 bill. The Treasury writes a number on a piece of paper which is about this size, and it's called a check. The numbers represent a quantity of what? Gold? Silver? Copper? Paper? Gross national product? Ink? Absolutely nothing. And they get the bills for no cent whatsoever. But if you think they spend anything, you tell me what it is they spend, I'll give you a pound of it free. Well, how many times does somebody make you an offer of free money? Over and over and over. If you could get these things for nothing, and they do, you'd probably print a couple extras, wouldn't you? You know, for a rainy day. It's always good to plan ahead. So we go to a Treasury brochure again. Amazing what they put in these little tiny little trinkets. It's called Production of Government Securities. IOUs are securities. The principal product of the Bureau is United States paper currency, averaging approximately 16 million notes a day. That goes 7 days a week. And it makes no difference if the denomination is a 1 or a 100. You know, if you could do that and get away with it, you would be the biggest employer in the world. You would have offices in virtually every town in America. You'd even have offices overseas. You'd have your own Air Force, Army, Navy, and Marines and Coast Guard. You would have a fleet of bureaucrats traveling around in vehicles that said interagency motor pool, and they would be sticking their nose in everybody's business but their own. If you could do that. And we can confirm it with the national debt. By the way, these books are very interesting. How many people have any of these Federal Reserve publications? There must be somebody here who has some. Good, one. You don't have any, right, Josh? I got some. Oh, you got something. I know you got something. The National Debt, Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. These books are free of charge. They will send you as many as 25 copies of each one. Why not? They stole them from you. The least they can do is give you a free book. And on page 8, you're going to read something really neat. Quote, the federal government, with the cooperation of the Federal Reserve, has the inherent power to create money. Hyphen, almost any amount of it. If you had the power to create money, almost any amount of it, is there anybody you couldn't buy? Is there any political election you could not overturn? Is there any theological cemetery that you couldn't pervert the doctrine of this book by nailing shut about 99% of it and opening up John chapter 3 and trying to build a theology out of that little verse in 16? You could really do some number on the minds of Americans if you had the power to create money. In fact, I asked Internal Revenue in a letter, you could take these books and write to IRS. These are nice books. If you people can create money, almost any amount of it, why do you need mine? That's assuming that this was money, which of course we know it's not. It was the best it ever was a promise to pay the money. It certainly couldn't be the money by taking the promise to pay the money off. Amos Bruce of St. Louis, that taxi cab driver, wrote a letter to this bank and he says, what limits the amount of money you can create? It says you can create almost any amount of it. What is the limit? They said two things. One, the speed of the presses. Two, the rate at which the public will accept it. It's a good game. Gold was officially demonetized in 1933. In other words, we weren't using gold as money anymore. It was demonetized. In 1963 to 68, we officially demonetized silver. What was the last series silver certificate? What year? 57? 57 was the last silver certificate series. In 1963, the day after JFK was assassinated, while we're busy watching that electronic campfire, they issued the first no-promise notes to start replacing the ones that still had promises on them. In 1965, what did they do? What happened then? They took the silver out of the coins. And June 24th, 1968, they did something else. Anybody who holds a silver certificate can no longer get silver for the silver certificate. June 24th was the deadline of 1968. So it took 5 years to wipe out silver. What has then been monetized since we demonetized gold and silver? We go to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and we find out who we have coined into money, because that's what monetized means. Page 27, opposite the chicken laying the big egg. That's us. I think we're the ones that are doing that. Banks create money by monetizing, that's coining or fashioning, debts. Does anybody here have any debt or that you want to bring up front and we can coin it into money? Would you like big coins or small coins? We can confirm it with 2 phases of debt, which is the right color book. Chicago Federal Reserve Bank. In addition to securities, the federal government issues non-interest-bearing debt, Sheldon Emery, currency or paper money. Exactly the system that some people want to replace with another system just like it. Only they don't like the name Federal Reserve note, they'd like to see the name U.S. note on top. U.S. notes, by the way, they issued $350 million in U.S. notes and never had any more than $150 million in gold to back them up. That's very profitable. I'd like to be able to run a checking account that way. When you went down to the bank to take a loan, which you never got, which the bank never made, but you thought they did, and they thought that they made it, and so forth and so on, if you had any of these things in your wallet, did you list those things on the asset and liability statement as assets, or did you list them as liabilities? The banker wants to know how much you're worth, doesn't he? So you have assets on one column and you have liabilities on the other. What were these? If you had any of those, what'd you call them? You don't know what you call them? You call them assets. That's what I call them. Currency is so widely accepted as a medium of exchange that most people do not think of it as debt. I didn't think those were debt, no. I thought those were assets. And the banker didn't try to convince me otherwise. If I thought they were assets, boy, he was going to call them assets. Page 1. Everyone knows what debt is when he owes it, but people sometimes forget that most of the financial assets they try to accumulate are the debts of others. The assets you're trying to accumulate are somebody else's debts. Assets are debts. That's what it says. But somebody might be thinking, oh, he's just stretching it. He's trying to take words out of context. Well, if assets are debts, then the opposite would have to be true. Debts would have to be assets. Page 5, red letters, and this is the title of the new section. It's called Debts Are Assets. You knew that already, though, right? Nothing else. Page 6, some debt assets are easily sold. Have you sold a debt asset today? Yeah, I just sold a +1 -1 today. Good. What is debt by definition? Because these numbers used to represent a quantity of gold in coin form, in other words, 258 grains. The numbers then used to represent a quantity of silver in coin form, which would be how much? 412.5 multiplied by 10 would be 4,125 grains, 9% pure. The numbers on these bills now represent a quantity of what? Debt. What is debt by definition? Black's Law Dictionary, 5th edition, relies upon state versus due say. Debt is, quote, a sum of money due. Hey, that's good. What we're using today as money is a sum of money we don't have yet. So I wrote to Internal Revenue. I said, I got a problem. If I owed you an income tax, which I know I don't because I don't have any income, gain or profit, I don't receive any dollars, and I can't be compelled to fill out a form because it's violative of my 1st, 4th, 5th, 9th Amendment rights and so forth and so on. But if I owed you a tax, I'd have to pay you in something. Now, I can't pay you in gold because gold was officially demonetized. I have that in a letter from the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. I can't pay you in silver because that was officially demonetized. They tell me the same thing. All I can pay you in now is monetized debt. But debt is a sum of money due. Well, if I delivered it to you, it would no longer be due. So I'd have to owe it to you. Tired today, aren't you? Electronic money and the payments mechanism. How many people here knew that electrons were money? How many electrons to the dollar? Stick your finger in an outlet. It's about $86.98. Electronic money. That's what we have in America. And yet there isn't a statute that I know of that declares electrons to be money. And that's what we use. Page 7. As any economist worth his salt, see, if you weren't worth your salarium back in the old days, your wage, you weren't worth your salt. As any economist worth his salt will be quick to point out, money has been a measure of value. It's also been a storehouse of value, which in due course has led to its use as a standard of deferred payment. Now, most people think that's money. If that is money, then that is used to defer payment. Now, funny, when anybody wants you to make payment, you can't make payment by deferring it. Defer means to put off, postpone, or delay. This is about an eighth printing. We verify that with keeping our money healthy. What are we using this money in America? All you bored, tired people ought to know. We've already covered. What is being used as money in America? Debt. So we're keeping our debt healthy. Okay. Page 12. And you recall, the Federal Reserve System works only with credit. Period. I thought it worked with paper. No, it doesn't. It works with credit. What's credit? We go to the Consumer Credit Code at 1.3 or 1.7. Credit is defined as, they say it's a right. I don't think it's a right, I think it's a privilege. But they say it's a right granted by one party to another to defer payment. Isn't that right? If credit is the right to defer payment, and that's all we use is credit, then what are we using to make payment? Nothing. That's why there are no payments being made, and that's why it is impossible to pay a debt with a Federal Reserve note. Do you understand it? You don't have to understand it. It makes no difference if we understand it or not. Everybody in this room could sit around and say, I think the earth is flat. And there was a time when people thought that. Did our God change the shape of the globe to satisfy our popular conception? Or misconception? No. It makes no difference if we are all deluded. Popular delusion is no less delusion. Facts will stand on their own, even if we're unaware of them. In fact, your car could be rifled right now and have nothing in it, but because you don't know it doesn't mean it hasn't happened. By the time you get out there to find out that the vehicle isn't even there, you'll figure out, my gosh, it did happen. You don't have to be aware of anything to have it ever happen. There is no payment being made in America expressed in dollars and cents, and it is impossible to pay in a Federal Reserve note unless the contract calls for Federal Reserve notes. It's impossible to pay. I'll demonstrate. We've got a watch over here, and I said, how much do you want for the watch? He said, look, I have $20. I forget his name, so I write him a check for $20 for his watch, and he gives me the watch. Have I paid for the watch yet? No. All I've parted with is a check, and a check is nothing more than an order form telling somebody else to pay him. We don't know if that check's any good, and I'm here to tell you that no check in America is any good, but some are worse than others. And those are the ones you want to watch out for right now. He gives me the watch, I give him the check, he then goes downtown, this man is selling hammers for $20. He says, I'd like to buy the hammer from you. He says, I don't have any Fed notes, these green bills, but I've got a check made out to cash from Bruce McCarthy. Will you take the check? He says, yeah. Can't you pass the check made out to cash to somebody else? If the person knows the party on whom that check has been drawn, can't you do it? I know they won't take mine. I'm not that slow. But they might take yours if they know you, unless you're worse than I think you might be. He passes him the check and gets the hammer. He gets compensated, but has he paid for the hammer yet? No. He then takes the check over to this man to get $20 worth of gasoline. He says, will you take a check from Bruce McCarthy? And Louis says, yeah, I know Bruce. I've seen him speak. He sounds like a good guy. He's honest. I'll take his check. He passes him the check and gets the gasoline. Did he pay Louis for the gas? No. Louis takes the check down to the banker. Sorry about that. Somebody had to be the banker today. He says, I want to present this check for payment. The banker looks at that and says, oh, crying out loud, Louis, how could you be so stupid? Bruce McCarthy closed out his checking account 3 years ago. He's writing bad checks just like we are and claiming equal protection of the law. That check's no good. Louis has suffered a loss, right? By percentage, how much of a loss did he take? 100%. If somebody takes 100% loss in this equation, somebody must have taken a 100% gain. Who was that? Honest Bruno. I got the watch for free. I have to declare that next year on my 1040 form because that's a gain or a profit and I have to declare it, right? That's income to me. Theft is income. I stole the watch. But he took the check in good faith, in due course, just like everybody takes bad checks in due course, in good faith. They never suspect. He passes the instrument off to another man and gets compensated for what I stole from him. This man passes off the check and gets compensated with gasoline for the hammer that he stole from him. But there was never any payment. There wasn't. Payment proceeds from A to B, B to C, and C to D. Compensation goes from B to A, C to B, and D to C. Until the instrument is bought back by the issuer, there is never any payment. Turn to the back sheet of your handout page, and we're going to cite the Maine Criminal Code to establish this. See, most people think, well, if these things are so worthless, how come I can go down to the supermarket and I can get my groceries for them? I can buy my groceries, can't I? No, you can't buy your groceries with a Federal Reserve note. But you can get your groceries with a Federal Reserve note. We'll go 7 paragraphs up from the bottom, and we start by reading, quote, a person is guilty of negotiating a worthless instrument if he intentionally issues or negotiates a negotiable instrument, knowing that it will not be honored by the who? Maker. The Maine Criminal Code, Title 17A, Section 708. That's my home state. If the maker doesn't buy back the check, if the maker doesn't buy back the note at par in a substance, there is never any payment, and at law, you have passed a worthless instrument. That's a fact. And on a radio program one time down in Florida, some guy called up and he said, well, he's making a lot of noise and so forth, but I can take my $10 Fed note. He says, and I can go down and buy my groceries down at the Safeway. No, sir, you cannot buy your groceries at the Safeway. But you can get your groceries at the Safeway. See, anybody in this room could go down to any supermarket in town and get all the groceries you want. But there wouldn't be anybody down there at the supermarket that said you just paid for them. Hey, I saw Bruce McCarthy down at the supermarket today. Yeah, what was he doing? He was attempting to pay for his groceries with his Uzi. If they had attended this seminar, they would have said, hey, I saw Bruce down at the Safeway today. Yeah, what was he doing? He was attempting to defer the payment with his Uzi. There are many ways to get things. You can beg, borrow, steal, or you can pay. But pay, by definition, is the delivery of money or the equivalent in specific property or services. Black's Law Dictionary relies upon Sizemore versus E.T. Barwick Industries on that. That is not money. It is not property. It is a liability, and a liability is an evidence of property that is owed to you, and a liability isn't property. It is not an asset. An asset is the opposite of a liability. In fact, it's not actually a debt. It's a liability, and the liability is the evidence of the debt that's owed, and the necessity to perform is called the obligation. Feast your eyes on that machine gun in pistol form if you aren't too familiar with that, and bear in mind that the Special Agents for Internal Revenue Service in South Florida now carry the Uzi. Nice country. Free country.
Our tax collectors walk around with machine guns in pistol form.
Redemption is essential. We know as Christians that when we go to church, we are not redeemed by the person to the left and the right of us in our pews. Are we? Why? Because that person didn't make you. You can only be bought back by your kinsman redeemer.
He took on him not the seed of angels, but the seed of Abraham. Hebrews 2:16. Law of kinsman redemption takes us back into Leviticus.
You can only be bought back by the maker. If I write a check to him, it makes no difference who gives him what for that check until I, the maker of the instrument, buy it back. There's never any payment. Period. If the Federal Reserve issues a note, it must buy it back at par. 1 for 1 in a substance. And if they don't, there's never any payment, and it makes no difference how many times that check circulates or how many times that note circulates. That's it. It's hard to believe that we live in a world of, 5 or 6 billion people, and that there's no one in the world using their national currencies making any payments whatsoever. That's rather staggering. Somebody here may think, well, he's wrong. That's all right. Stick a hand up and tell me I'm wrong. Maybe I'll have to elucidate this a little bit better. There is nobody making any payments at law anywhere in the world right now. And we've got almost 6 billion people. Hard to believe you could fool that many people. 7? South Africa? Is South Africa using gold coin in circulation? You can get Krugerrand coins, but you can also get gold coins from the Treasury. You know, some of their medallion coins. But they don't circulate.
They don't circulate.
No, not to my knowledge. I don't know of any country in the world that circulates any substance as money. The IMF won't tolerate that. My gosh, we can't. We'll bring tremendous sanctions against a country that tries to pay its debts. Everybody's got to use IOUs. They use Rand notes. I get some Rand notes for South Africa. A Rand is a unit of money, and a Krugerrand is 1,000 Rand, I think. So the Krugerrand coin actually it's not actually a Krugerrand, a gold Krugerrand. It's actually a Krugerrand weight of gold, or supposed to be. Yeah. And those you can get those things,
The Rands aren't redeemable.
The Rands are. I've got some Rand notes that say they are, but I've also got British pound notes that say they are. In fact, I got Farmers National Bank of China that say they're redeemable. Nations all over the world are still issuing notes that still have the promises on them, and you'll still find promises on the U.S. notes, the Federal Reserve notes, some of them. Well, let's bring this first part of this hoedown to a close here with just a quick expose on the, wrong page. Federal Reserve notes. Federal Reserve notes. They say Federal Reserve notes. Are they federal? No. By their own declaration. We'll just take one proof. We could use many, but let's go to the Computer World magazine, 1979. Where the San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank was looking for computer programmers. You've seen this. Some of you people have probably seen this particular ad. The Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. Some people still think we're a branch of the government. Next sentence is a real long one. We're not. Takes care of that, doesn't it? The word reserve. That implies that there are funds on hand to make an instrument good. Are there any reserves? No. Coins and currency, New York Federal Reserve Bank, page 14, the only page with red letters. There are no longer any specific backing requirements against Federal Reserve notes. Who says? Federal Reserve Bank of New York. What have they just said? They just said that if you know that, you are now guilty of passing a worthless instrument law. And every state, to my knowledge, has laws, and they're called bad check laws. And that comes under it. Try to get prosecuted. I put a public notice, in fact, half a page in a local newspaper, and I told them I was passing bad notes and I wanted to get prosecuted. I didn't even get a letter. I thought surely that, I wrote it to the Attorney General and a few other people. Nobody writes. Page 29 of I Bet You Thought. Currency cannot be redeemed or exchanged for treasury gold or any other asset used as backing. It's a bad note. What is a note by definition? We go to the Uniform Commercial Code. I'm sure it applies here in your state, at 3-104 Part 1. A note is an absolute and unconditional promise by the maker to pay someone a specified sum of money at a specified time. Are they notes? No, because it doesn't say who is paying, it doesn't say what is going to be paid, it doesn't say who is going to be paid, and it doesn't say when. They're not notes anymore. It says it's legal tender. Is it legal tender? They got a statute that says it is, but that doesn't mean it is. They could write a statute that says that the moon is made out of green cheese, but that doesn't mean it's so. Federal Reserve notes are not legal tender because according to the laws of tender, you must buy back your instrument at par in a substance, and if you don't do so, the tender is considered to be abandoned. Can an abandoned tender be a legal tender? I don't think so. It's not Federal, no reserves, not a note, it's not dollars either because we already discussed there's only one piece of paper, it can't be 10 of anything. And it's not legal tender. Five-way fraud just on the face of the note. And we carried these things. How long ago did anybody know all these things? Somebody knew this before I did. But we go through life blissfully and we read the things but we never look up the words. We're so far removed from real dictionaries, my gosh, it's a wonder that we can even talk about the weather. In fact, we really don't talk about the weather. It's a nice day, it's a bad day, and one guy thinks it's a nice day, another guy wants rain, another guy says he wants a sunny day. We can't even make up our mind what a good day is. Farmer wants rain, the guy wants to go to the beach, he wants sun. What are they if they're not all of these things? I coined a definition. You're free to use it if you want. They are fiscal enemas. The court recorder get that? I think so. Ask him what a fiscal enema is. A debt instrument injected into the economy by the banking system to see what can be flushed out of us. Why don't we take a 5-minute break and we all go potty, and we'll clean up with the next part. The next part is shorter. Believe me. Trust me. I won't tell you how short is. I will make it just as fast as I can, and I guarantee it'll be shorter than this part, and we will establish why banks charge interest and the fact that they don't need to charge any interest on any loan, and we will establish why the government taxes us when it needs absolutely no tax, and we'll prove that beyond a shadow of a doubt. And we'll add some coherence, and we'll close this thing out. We'll even give you a few tips on the law and so forth, and maybe even give you a solution or two, and we'll let you go home. So you won't go home, any bluer than you might be right now. Let's take 5.
I'd like to take just a minute. And I was just telling Bruce, after he's been explaining to us that we don't have any money, I feel kind of foolish doing this. This is something Bruce has not asked for any compensation for coming down here to speak for us. This is strictly what I'm asking. If you're here tonight and you feel that what he is doing is worthwhile and you believe that this should continue, we have a basket over here on the table, and would like to ask that if you feel you'd like to contribute, it's over there. If you think we're all a bunch of nuts and you don't, well, don't. That's fine. That's all I want to say. So, let you get back to it. Thanks.
I have to take the shotgun approach because there are people here who probably know a great deal about the fraud. There are probably people here who don't know anything about it. So I'm left in a quandary. I have to pretty well come out blazing with both barrels, and a couple of the pellets will probably hit you. I hope a lot of them do. We've discussed the Federal Reserve as being the central bank. They'll tell you that in their own books. And a central bank is quite important in what we're discussing in terms of the overall world economy. Page 9 of Your Money and the Federal Reserve System tells us, since 1913, quote, the Federal Reserve System has functioned as the central bank of the United States. Its chief job is monetary policy to manage the supply of money and credit. What's the difference? All we're using is credit. Our money is credit. So all they're doing is managing the supply of credit and credit. In the 1800s, a man wrote a book which probably has been more widely read with the exception of the Bible. This book that I have in my hands has probably influenced world behavior of our people, not only foreign people, more than any other book, with the exception of the Bible. What was the name of that book? The Communist Manifesto. Who was the author? And what was Karl Marx's real name? Moses Mordecai Levy. Hawaiian. Strange about that. In fact, there was another fellow that worked for the conspiracy too. He was one of the six leaders of the Bolshevik Revolution. Was the name of Leon Trotsky, but that wasn't his real name either, was it? Leon Bronstein. Wow. Came up from New York. Have a little rebellion. In fact, he had been given a lot of gold by another man by the name of Schiff in New York. Coincidental, I guess. Page 104, we have the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. I don't know if these are taught in the schools or not. I wasn't taught these when I was in school, and if I had been, I might have been smart enough, I don't know, to figure out that every one of the 10 planks has been made law in the United States. And if you tried to take away the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto from the average American, he would fight you tooth and nail, wouldn't he? Americans love communism. They embrace it. But they don't like the word. They would rather call it democracy. This is not a democracy. Article 4, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution guarantees to every state a Republican form of government. There are only two sources of law. Either God makes it, or man makes it. When God makes law, it is called a theocracy. It comes from the Greek theos, God, kratein, to make the rules. When man makes the rules, it is called a democracy. Demos, man, kratein, to make the rules. Isaiah told us in 33:22, for Yahweh, the Lord God, is our lawgiver. James confirmed that for New Testament Christians only. In 4:12, there is but one lawgiver. That pretty well takes care of what kind of a government we're supposed to have as Christians. But we've become a democracy, unfortunately. The central bank, which is the Federal Reserve, was passed in 1913, 2 days before Christmas. The same year we got the second plank of the Communist Manifesto, but the central bank was the fifth plank. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. That's the Fed. What was the second plank, which was passed the same year? Quote, in toto, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. That's it. Same year. The eighth plank of the Communist Manifesto is the Equal Rights Amendment. But Karl Marx uses, Moses Mordecai Levy, uses a different way of expressing it. Equal liability of all to labor. Got to get the women out of the house. Why? Because we got to break down the family unit. Why? Because we got to take the kids away from home. Why? 10th plank. Free education for all children in public schools. Period. Mr. Levy wanted us to be very well educated. In fact, he was so interested in our well-being that he wanted to make sure that we had a nice central bank so we could save our gold and silver coins. Very easy to do. We have no payment, and the purpose of these notes or fiscal enemas is to get what you produce without paying you for it. That's exactly what the government does. The government, in cooperation with the Federal Reserve, which it created, gets all of these notes and checks for absolutely no thing. We don't. It is what you give up in the way of your production or your labor to get that note, which is what the government floats on at all levels. How do they get it? By letting you work for these pieces of paper. You notice, for example, we've talked a lot about the central bank, but we somehow neglected to mention our local bankers downtown. And we don't want to exclude him from the fraud, because the Fed doesn't. The Fed squeals on your local banker. The Story of Money, the Story of Banks. I get the Story of Money over here. Story of Banks, a red comic book from the New York Fed. Page 5, we have 6 little pictures here and some smiling bankers. Now you'd smile too if you could do downtown what this guy is doing. Because of the fractional reserve system, banks as a whole, all banks, can expand our money supply several times by making loans and investments. And it shows here in the next 5 pictures that if you have a checking account, and that's called a demand deposit at a bank. If you've got a savings account, that's called a time deposit. Okay? If you have a checking account with your banker downtown, every $1,000, it would make a difference if it's 1,000 or if it's 1 or 10 or 100. The ratio is the same, but we'll use 1,000 because that's what they use here. Every $1,000 you deposit in your checking account allows your local banker to create, in this illustration, $6,000 that he never had. How does he do that? With one of these. And here he is on his adding machine, and he's doing it. He says, as the process continues with borrowers' funds ending up in different banks, the original $1,000 deposit can expand to more than $6,000. Now, it's a neat system. The more you deposit in these fictitious numbers in your local bank, the more numbers your banker can create on his books. In fact, while we were coming over here in our vehicle today, we looked at a billboard and it said that you've got a bank over here that's got $400 million to lend. There's a picture of a guy on the thing with his necktie kind of hanging down over the edge of the billboard. $400 million to lend. Hey, that's nothing, folks, because in Lake City, Florida, we saw a bank that had an ad in a newspaper. I wish I had it with me. And they said that they had so many $1 million to lend, and they crossed it out. You know what they said underneath that? They said, we have an unlimited amount of money to lend. Tell all the other banks. An unlimited amount of money to lend. Where'd they get it? They create it. And you'd smile too if you could do that. If you deposit $1,000 in your checking account in this illustration here, your banker can loan you $6,000 that he never had. And all you have to do is to pay him back the $6,000 that he never loaned you the hard way with your sweat and toil, plus interest. Interest on what? Interest on a loan he never made. You could get rich doing that, and you'd have title to everybody's property in town. Wouldn't you? This was when the reserve requirement on demand deposits was 15%. The reserve requirement downtown on demand deposits now, to my understanding from the brochures I've read from the Fed, is now only 3% on the first 25 million. If the math hasn't changed, that means for every $1,000 you put in a checking account, your local banker can create another $30,000 that he never had. Does that make your $1,000 in the bank worth more? Or does your $1,000 in the bank suddenly become worth a little bit less because there's an awful lot more of it around? The more we play with the sinner, the more we get burned. They'll confirm this in books, for example, how the local banks create money, in a book called Money and Economic Balance. And on page 17, they tell us here, and it's under title, How Banks Create Money. Funny, when I went to school, my guidance counselor asked me how I'd like to go earn money. He never asked me if I'd like to go create some. Because if I had been given the choice of creating or earning, I'd take the job creating it and let the rest of you people earn it. Commercial banks are important financial institutions because they can create money. How far do we have to go from here to find a commercial bank? A few blocks? Checkbook money. When we borrow $200 at a local bank to buy a washing machine, this is a couple of years old. They've been creating too much more of the stuff, so now the washing machines are probably a lot more. We sign an IOU and the banker writes a slip for a $200 addition to our checking account. No one has any less money on deposit, but we have more. That's pretty good. I lend Ray my car. I don't have any less cars. I still got my car. Now he's got a car. How did we do that? I didn't lend him a car. I just created a car. The banker has bought our IOU with new demand deposit, checkbook money, which were created. It's very profitable. We can go to the economics textbook and the college professor will tell you that. We have a debt usury system. Sheldon Emery talks about a debt usury system. Let's find out what a debt usury system is. Debt is a sum of money due. In other words, the money we're trying to save is the money we never earned because the banks never put it into circulation because they didn't have any to put into circulation. If you don't believe it, take all your Federal Reserve notes, put them in a 5-gallon plastic bucket, bury them in your backyard, wait 10 years, and find out what you got. you will at least by then admit that, by gosh, I got a bucket full of money that I haven't got yet. No money. It's still due. $10 of something is still due. You've only got one piece of paper here. Where's the other 10? Of what? Usury is the fee that banks charge for the loan of the money they never lend. Now the Bible says, thou shalt not lend to thy brethren upon usury, and usury in Old English law, according to my Black's Law Dictionary 2nd edition, was interest of money. Period. In modern law, it is unlawful interest. I had a man tell me once, in fact I heard him over, actually he wasn't talking directly to me, he was talking to another man, he was a newspaper editor, he says, 5% interest is bearable, but 8% is unbearable. What's the difference? Besides 3%. I had a patriot tell me that the Bible does not condemn interest. It condemns usury. He says 5% and under is okay, he says 6% and over is usurious. Fine, I'll bite. Show me the passage and I will amend my position. So far as I know, usury and interest are the same thing. If you could create principle, why would you charge interest? If you could create principle downtown, if you could take $1,000 from me, and if you just received it from me, you could create another 6,000 you never had, why would you have to charge interest on any loans? Have you ever heard of a counterfeiter counterfeiting 10s and 20s in his basement and then charging interest on what he put into circulation? You know something? I'd be willing to bet you if he had done that, his neighbors never would have figured out that he was counterfeiting. This man right here comes into me, he says, Bruno, I want to take a loan. That's my nickname. I said, what you want? He said, I want $1,000. I said, what for? He says, to build an outhouse with 2 electrically heated toilet seats. I said, that's a very good idea. I think you ought to have one. I'm going to make you $1,000 loan at no interest. Because I like you. Gee. So I give him $1,000. And I give him to him. What did it cost me? Nothing. Just printing. If I run out of paper, what am I going to get the paper with? A piece of paper that I just printed on my own machine. Isn't that right? The whole bunch of us are in our basement, we're just grinding out 10s. Okay, we got 10s here. And pretty soon we're running out of paper. And Dick says, oh, Bruce, we're going to have to go to work and make an honest living because we're running out of paper. I said, no, Dick. I said, go get some more paper. He says, what am I going to get the paper with? Take a few of those downtown and find a stationery store and get some good paper. He brings the paper back. What did the paper cost us? Right? Nothing. Run along. Pretty soon, oh, gosh, he says, we're running out of ink. I said, go down and get some more ink. He says, what am I going to get the ink with? Just take a few of these that we just printed. Crumple them up just a little bit. What did the ink cost? Nothing. Pretty soon the machine's starting to get worn. Oh my gosh, he says, we got to buy a new machine. What are we going to get the machine with? Write a check against those. It's a lot easier. Because when this Mr. Robert Stevens from the Treasury called, my question to him was, what did you buy your new printing presses with that cost almost $3 million a piece? He said, we bought them with dollars. I said, dollars a unit of the money. It's not the money. Did you buy them with dollars of gold? He says, no. Did you buy the machines with dollars of silver? He says, no. I said, what did you buy them with? He says, Federal Reserve notes, I guess. Sir, you printed those on your own machine. Long silence. They didn't even use Federal Reserve notes, they used a check. Now, if a person didn't think the check was any good, okay, then they'll write some other kinds of IOUs to back the checks. But a check was nothing but an order to pay. These were a promise to pay with a promise taken off. You still haven't been paid. And you got them for free. And the checks you got for free. You know what he says to me? I never gave it a thought. This is a man working in the Treasury. And he's the man who is supposed to be responsible for getting these machines and saving the taxpayers thousands of dollars. He was a big wheel. I mean, he wasn't just a little page boy there. You know what he did? He requested a copy. I know I got one of these in the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. That book, by the way, has been read by the Vice President of the Bank of America and declared to be correct, as stated. Where were we? Interest. He borrows $1,000 from me. Well, I just had it printed, so I give it to him. He goes out, and this man over here is a carpenter, and he builds him the outhouse. How does he build it? By the sweat of his brow, as he was commanded in Genesis and Exodus. Now, he's earned $1,000. He then spends the 1,000 with the rest of you people, and you get it. How do you get it? You work by the sweat of your brow to get these things. You don't get them for free. Now, this man who took the loan has got to get them back from you. How does he get them back from you people? He's got to work by the sweat of his brow, and he gets them back. He's got the $1,000 back. He comes back into the bank. He plunks them down on the table. He says, "I'm out of debt." That's right. You're now a free man. The Bible tells us in Proverbs 22:7 that the rich ruleth the poor, and the borrower is the servant or the slave to the lender. He was my slave during the loan. What am I going to do with these $1,000 that I just got back? Do you think I'm going to tear them up? Throw them away? Why don't I see how good they are? I'd like to have an outhouse just like his. After all, I'm a banker. I have needs and urges and necessities. I go to the carpenter and I said, "I'd like to have you build me an outhouse just like his. Will you build it for me?" He says, "Sure." "How much is it going to cost?" He says, "It's going to cost you $1,000. I said, "No problem." I give him the $1,000. He builds me the outhouse. How much did the outhouse cost me? Nothing. Why? Because I got the $1,000 for free. Why was I able to get the outhouse for free? Because I got the rest of you non-bankers to work by the sweat of your brow to impart psychological value to my worthless instruments at law, so I won't have to. All I have to do is to maintain the confidence in the system. If I can make you believe that that this is money, and that these are dollars, and that they're worth working for, then I've got you. But if I made loans at no interest, you'd figure it out. How can he loan me $1,000 at no interest? He's not making any money. Could he be getting these things for nothing? He's counterfeiting. So to conceal the fraud, I charge him a little bit of a carrying charge. And he never figures out that I'm creating principal out of thin air. So I loan him $1,000 and I charge him 1 cent interest. Now watch what happens. All of you people represent the community, and I'm the only bank. He borrows $1,000 from me. He spends it. Everybody works to get it. He comes back and tries to pay me back, and all he's got is $1,000. He owes me $1,000 and 1 cent because I have a 1 cent interest. Where does he get the 1 cent to pay the interest on the $1,000? He or somebody else has to borrow it into circulation at interest. Or very simply, let's suppose that eggs were money and I owned all the chickens. And I loaned him 3 eggs, but I told him he had to pay me back 4 eggs. 1 egg is interest. Where's he going to get the other egg? Somebody has to borrow it into circulation. Debt becomes virtually perpetual, and the Fed acknowledges that in 2 faces of debt. Page 23, last page. Existing debt will be refinanced over and over again. Isn't that what farmers generally do year by year by year by year? They keep rolling their debts. If you roll your debt or refinance, are you out of debt or are you still in debt? Still in debt. Last paragraph. Debt, public and private, is here to stay. Is debt good? Well, they think it is, yeah. The national debt, page 1. Philadelphia Fed. A large and growing number of analysts, on the other hand, now regard the national debt as something useful, if not an actual blessing. The national debt is a blessing. You notice nobody tries to figure out how we're going to reduce it. Why? You can't. We live in a system where it cannot be reduced because if they try to restrict the funny money supply, you know what happens? Foreclosures. If they tighten up on the funny money supply, there must be wholesale foreclosures. That puts a lot of people on the welfare roll, which causes government to get bigger and bigger and bigger, fewer and fewer producers, more and more consumers. The economy starts going to pot even faster. So they're caught between a rock and a hard place. Last page, same book. Debt has a deceptive something for nothing kind of charm. Last sentence. Used recklessly, it has the power to make us its slave. Slavery is a blessing. Why do banks charge interest on a loan? To conceal the fraud and to set the hook. Now, I've heard tell that if a bank loaned $40,000, in fact, I had the man who wrote this book right here, he wrote and said that if a bank puts $40,000, which it's created, if it loans you $40,000 to get your house, and you pay that $40,000 back at no interest, there's been no fraud. And there's been no theft. I loan you $40,000 on a demand note. 6 months demand note. 1 month after I've made you that advance, and you've got yourself a tractor, I come out onto your farm and I said, excuse me, we've got a call on that note. Well, I got 6 months. No, it's a demand note. And we got to have it next week. Well, I just got a tractor. Well, just sell it. But everybody else is trying to sell their tractors. I won't get $40,000 for my tractor. It's a used tractor. I'll do well, I get $20,000 for it. Gee, that's too bad. Who gets the tractor? The bank. But the bank doesn't want tractors, does it? Sure, it likes tractors. If they can get you to work the tractors again, they'll sell that tractor at an auction. And they'll run the cycle over and over. We could create numerous instances where with no interest whatsoever, the banks could precipitate exactly the same fraud they're precipitating right now. The only problem is you'd figure out that the banks are creating the numbers out of nothing. And you'd shut them down. They must charge interest. But they create 50,000, charge 150,000 for principal and interest. They take 100,000 more from us than they put in circulation. If that be so, then our pockets ought to be empty. But the funny money supply is higher now than it was 2 years ago. Why? Because they create principal faster than the interest hauls it off. Interest isn't the only problem. Principal creation is part of it. And it's a big, big part of it. Perpetual debt is like lead postage stamps. You take your letter down, and you put your lead postage stamps on it, and the more stamps you put on it, the heavier the letter gets, and the more postage you got to put on. Pretty soon you've got a letter that's about that thick. It'll never go. Well, Bruce, you're making banks sound like a very corrupt deal. Sure. If we deposit a $1 weight of gold in a bank, a banker told me that he would credit my account $1. That's right, isn't it? You write to any bank around town here and you ask them, if you've got a $1 weight of gold or a $20 weight of gold, if you deposit that coin, do they identify the quantity and the substance or just the quantity? Bankers write to me and they say, we only identify the quantity, not the substance on deposit. That on the book looks like 1.00. If you deposit a 90% dollar weight of silver, that goes on deposit as 1.00. What do you think you're going to get back? You put a 40% dollar weight of silver, and there's really no such a thing as a 40% dollar, but remember those clad coins they made a few years back, the Eisenhower specials, with 40% silver? Made them for a couple of years. Same thing, they credit you with $1. If you take down to your local bank an 8-cent copper nickel dollar, they credit you $1. If you take a 3-cent Susan B. Agony super quarter, because they get these coins for nothing, they don't really pay 3 cents, you get credited $1. If you deposit a paper bill that says it's $1, you get credited $1. 6 different items all claim to be, measure, or weigh $1. And on paper, they all look the same. 1.00, 1.00, 1.00. Try it and see. Oh, I hope you don't. I'd hate to see you lose your gold and silver. So I asked the banker, I said, if I close out the account, what am I going to get back? I've got 6 items. He says, you're going to get $6. $6 of what? He says, you're going to get paper. Specifically what? He says, you're going to get a $5 bill and a $1 bill. That's a good investment, isn't it? It's a good place to keep your gold and silver down at the bank. What happened to the gold and the silver and the copper nickel? The banker starts to get a little bit nervous. He wants to change the subject real quick. That's the nature of banking. Let's hit taxes for just a moment. Back page of a handout sheet, we get the triple tax. If you get nothing out of this, At least you want to comprehend the simple argument. I don't fill in 1040 forms. And if you're on a radio program or something of that nature, somebody calls up and says, well, if you people don't pay your taxes, how's the government going to operate? How do you think it operates now? It steals everything it wants. It will do fine without me. In fact, it would do quite well without all of you. The only thing is, the system will be discovered. We're going to discuss why taxes are levied at all. If taxes are burdensome to you, then perhaps it's because you're paying thrice. Not city, state, and federal. Federal, federal, federal. First, by giving up real wealth. What is real wealth? Your labor or your production. I'll avoid heavy definitions of the term wealth. To get the notes, like these here, which the government gets for free. That's your first tax. And that is the only tax that the government operates on. What you give up to get that gets taken by the government. Not everything you give up, but much of what you give up in the private sector is stolen by the public sector by transferring. You got a government contract, you grow wheat, and the government wants the wheat. Got to feed the Navy. What do they give you? Nothing. Piece of paper with a number on it. They stole the wheat, but the farmer doesn't care because he's going to steal something else from you. That is a tax receipt and proof positive of a tax already paid. The more Federal Reserve notes you've got in your pocket, the more tax receipts you have, the more taxes you've already paid. You've delivered assets, commodities, and property in exchange for that. And that was the only payment that was ever made. That was a liability received. There was no payment when you got that done. The second tax, we'll break these down in a second. The second tax is when you hold these pieces of paper called Fed notes or bank checks and suffer depreciation, which most people call inflation, in proportion to the time you hold them. The longer you hold it, the less it's worth, which means the less you can confiscate from your neighbor as compared to what was confiscated from you. And the third tax is when the government makes you feel guilty if you don't send them some of those, which they print at the rate of 16 million bills a day at no cost to themselves in the first place. The ones that you send to the government, you can't get anything for. But they can. Let's break it down. First tax. When the Treasury admits that they get these bills for less than 2 cents, and I assert they get them for no cents of anything, who can deny that he or she hasn't already paid a tax directly or indirectly in proportion to what you gave up to get the note that the government got for free? If I was printing these things and I told you I was getting them for nothing, and you were working to get them, it wouldn't be too long for you to figure out why I was traveling around in an airplane called Air Force One, while the rest of us travel around in small vehicles. The second tax is inflation, and I never thought of it as a tax until the Fed told us. They tell us. Money in colonial New England. And they refer to the Continental Note, the $750 haircut, Page 33. Many congressmen realized, this is the Boston Fed, realized that paper money itself was nothing but a form of disguised taxation. Taking these from you is not a tax. The fact that they are already in your pocket is already the tax you paid. This is the tax. Like a person says, I don't worship that stuff, but I like what I can get for it. And that's exactly what the government likes. They like what they can get for it. And they can get anything they want for those, and they get it for nothing. Said one legislator, quote, the natural, unavoidable tax of depreciation, that's inflation, is the most certain, expeditious, and equal tax that could be devised. Think about that. If you want honest taxation, get rid of the income tax and just tell them you'll go with pure inflation. That's the most equal tax that could be devised. And it's a tax. And if it's a tax, it's in favor of whom? The government. Every possessor of money, and they're not talking about gold or silver or assets and commodities, they're talking about funny money. Every possessor of funny money here has paid a tax in proportion to the time he held it. Isn't that right? The longer you hold that, the more tax you pay. confirmed by John Maynard Keynes. Watch. This is beautiful. Get a copy of this book, or their sequel that they wrote to this. They're free. Remember he said the best way to destroy the capitalist system was to debauch the currency? By a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate. That's legal, isn't it? Secretly and unobserved, that's why they get away with it, an important part of the wealth of their citizens. How do they do that? They print numbers on pieces of paper and steal what you produce. By this method, they not only confiscate, but they confiscate arbitrarily, and while the process impoverishes many, great future, huh? It actually enriches some. It has to. You can't steal from a lot of people without enriching a few people. It doesn't just disappear into outer space. Lenin, he said, was certainly right. There is no subtler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of society than to debauch the currency. And it's been debauched 100%, which means the end can't be too far away. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction. For those who think that, well, I'll just ignore it and just go on forever and ever. Destruction implies a finality, and not a very good one. And does it in a manner which not one man in a million is able to diagnose. And here's the problem. I don't know how many people there are here in Walla Walla, but we don't have very many of them represented here, do we? And if you try to explain to your neighbor the fact that he's going to lose everything he's got, that there is no private property in America, and that our young people will never own a home. They will never own a home. That's as factual as my standing here and you're sitting there. Our young people will never own anything in this country. And they think they're on their way to glory and riches. And if you try to explain it to your neighbor, he will defend this fraud with his last breath. Why? Because he doesn't understand it. So he'll fight you over it, if you do understand it. Page 10, Keynes argues that inflation is, quote, a method of taxation which the government uses to secure the command over real resources, resources just as real as those obtained by ordinary taxation. That's pretty heavy. What is raised by printing notes? He doesn't say by taking them away from you. They don't need them. What is raised by printing notes, he says, is just as much taken from the public as is a beer duty or an income tax. How many people knew that? This is John Maynard Keynes. He gets the whole book here for the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. They regard this as important. Regarding the inflation tax, he says, quote, a government can live by this means when it can live by no other. It is the form of taxation which the public find hardest to evade, and even the weakest government can enforce when it can enforce nothing else. Almost all the meetings I speak to are patriot groups. And you know what they're worried about? The income tax. If you were going to try to run a tyrannical government, would you try to run it on an income tax, or would you try to get into the counterfeiting business? Which do you think is more profitable? This beats the income tax 10 ways to Sunday. It runs 7 days a week. It doesn't stop on bank holidays, and it doesn't need a team of IRS agents to enforce. Well, why do they have internal revenue? John Maynard Keynes gives you the answer. It's printed right in front of you. He said, quote, if government should refrain from regulation, they regulate us by taxes, the worthlessness of the money becomes apparent and the fraud upon the public can be concealed no longer. If the government didn't charge you any taxes, you'd figure it out. My gosh, they're getting this stuff for free. Isn't that simple? You know, truth is really simple. And they send us through the brain laundries year after year after year, and simple truths are never taught. Representative Ron Paul from Texas was asked in a letter by Amos Bruce, is it necessary for the federal government to tax anyone? I've got a copy of the letter. Anybody here got a copy of that letter? It's a 1979 letter. He says it is not technically necessary for the federal government to tax anyone directly. It could simply print the money it wants. That's a misnomer. You can't print money. You can print notes, but you can't print money. Let's forgive him, though. It could simply print the money it wants, but that would be too bold a stroke, and the public would catch on as to what kind of a counterfeiting operation we're running. Wouldn't you like to have a letter like that in your files when IRS agents come knocking? Hey, look at this, folks. You don't need what I've got. Here's a congressman right here. He says you guys can get all you want. Here's the book right here from the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. It says you guys get all you want. You don't need what I've got. You guys are committing fraud. Ooh, IRS agents don't like that kind of talk. Truth is powerful. If you don't think so, apply a little bit of it. Carefully. And do it in an eloquent fashion. And you will see that you can hold off a lot of people once you know the truth. The only thing they can do about it then is get rid of you. Why does the government tax us? Why does the government tax us? To conceal the fraud, that they get these for free. They don't need you. What's the deficit for this year alone? Does anybody know? This year's deficit. Not the whole deficit, but just this year's. About $200 billion. What does that mean? Does that mean that they're going to spend $200 billion more than they took from the taxpayers? If they needed taxpayers, how could they spend $200 billion more than they got? Because they didn't need taxpayers. In fact, they could have spent $1 trillion and told the people, don't send us any 1040 forms this year. We're going to give you the year off. If we can spend $200 billion more than we take in, why can't we spend $1 trillion more than we take in? They do. And then really they don't, because they don't spend anything. Spend means to pay. And they don't pay anything. Well, what perpetuates our voluntary participation in the system? Nobody comes with a gun and says, you must take these things. Why do we take these things? Gold, Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, page 10. Through guarantees that paper money, they put that in quotation marks. You know there's no such thing as paper money? There's no such thing as paper money. If I said we were using metallic money, what would that mean we were using as money? A metal? If I said we were using plastic money, that would presuppose we're using plastic as money. If I said we're using paper money, that would presuppose we're using paper as money. Paper has never been declared to be money. Paper has never even been declared to be a legal tender. You know why? It's too heavy. It is way too heavy to be used as money. What's a new Cadillac cost now? $25,000 bucks? So let's go down to the paper company, wherever there might be one. It might be Boise Cascade. Tell them down at the warehouse you want $25,000 worth of toilet tissue. And the guy says, well, you got a problem or something? No. I want to go buy a Cadillac and I want to pay for it in paper. You got any idea how much paper you'd need to buy a Cadillac if you want to buy it in paper? The numbers on the paper represent no connection with paper. That does not represent a quantity of gold, silver, copper, paper, or anything. It represents a quantity of money still owed, debt. It's just like a bad check. Quantity enough. So they say here, through guarantees that paper money, and they put that in quotation marks, so maybe they know there's no such thing as paper money either, could be exchanged for something of intrinsic value, gold served to inspire a measure of confidence in the system. It is a confidence game. And that is all. Hosea told us in 4:6, my people are destroyed for lack of confidence? Knowledge. Therefore, since you've rejected knowledge, I will reject thee, and you will no longer be a priestly people to me. And I'll reject your children. And he certainly has. Why? Because you have forsaken the commandments of your God. That's where the law comes from. That's the beginning of all knowledge. What are the consequences for all of this garbage? Well, let's look at what they did in Germany. Look what they did in Germany. I've got here a comic book. They have to send these out to our schools, our elementary schools and so forth, because they figure the kids can't read. So they got to give them comic books. Pretty pictures. Page 20. Here's a guy burning up his notes in Germany. And he says here, nothing like cold cash to make a hot fire. Now, that's not quite correct either, because the notes aren't cash. A Federal Reserve note isn't cash. A silver certificate isn't cash. You've got to cash in a note or a certificate to get the cash. You've got to cash in a check to get the cash. And the only cash was gold and silver. Cash is money, Curlin versus Young. But anyway, it says here that Germany had the worst inflation of any modern industrial nation 50 years ago, when the value of its paper money, no such thing, fell so low that currency was a cheaper fuel than firewood. It's pretty cheap. Is that true? Yeah. Steering a course between inflation and unemployment. That's like steering a course between a rock and a hard place. This was written by the Vice President and Secretary, Mr. Lawrence C. Murdoch, of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. And on page 8, he says, quote, in the 3 years prior to December 1923, German wholesale prices rose more than 1 trillion times. T as in tango. Inflation accelerated so fast that many restaurant patrons paid in advance, because if they waited until they finished eating, the price of the meal might double. That was told us in written form, verbatim, twice, with a picture to confirm it. We got 3 witnesses on the same page. What would you do if you came into my sandwich shop, and when you ordered a sandwich, the price of the sandwich was $1. By the time I made it, the price was $2. By the time I rang it up on the debt register, which most people call a cash register, the price was $4. By the time you got it to the door, it was $8, and by the time you started to eat it, it was $16. How much am I going to charge you for the sandwich? I got no way of knowing. You know what we do then? We close to keep from losing our shirt. And that's exactly what they suggest in here. They suggest that we're heading for something worse than national bankruptcy. Same bank. Page 8. The national debt. Remember they said the government had the power to create money almost any amount of it? This power makes it possible for governments to pursue policies that could have even more disastrous results than bankruptcy. Isn't that sad? Our country is heading for something worse than national bankruptcy, and there's hardly anybody that will tell us. In fact, very few people would ever think about what could possibly be worse than national bankruptcy. How about when the farmers don't want Federal Reserve notes from you anymore? You give me gold, silver, gasoline to run my combine or whatever, but don't give me any more of that stuff. I don't want any more of those numbers. What happens? Trade stops, and we enter, at least for the second time in history of man, we enter again the Dark Ages. That's what happened when the Roman Empire debauched its currency. We entered a period of time called the Dark Ages. And the Dark Ages are characterized by direct barter, 2 chickens for a goat. That is cumbersome. Indirect barter is the use of something as money. That is nice, and things really move. Fraud is even worse, of course. All of society breaks down. And the Bible seems to hint that something's coming. Entering the time of Jacob's troubles, maybe. Tribulation the likes of which there's never been before. I can't imagine it. But I think most of us are going to see it. Certainly not going to be raptured out. You might get shot before it happens, but that's about the closest rapture I think you're going to get. Anybody here have insurance? Life insurance? Anybody got life insurance? Nobody's got life insurance. One person. Imagine, a couple people. Imagine how you'd feel in this situation here. This is the Vice President and Secretary of this bank. Beneficiaries seldom bothered to collect on life insurance policies. You pay all your life, but they didn't bother to collect on it. Didn't bother. Why? because the proceeds often were worth less than the current price of a stamp to notify the company. I spoke to a group in Chicago, or in that area, Rockford, Illinois, I guess, a year ago, and a man told us afterwards that he knew a friend in Germany who retired and was trying to live off the interest of 50,000 marks in Germany. Now, a mark is a unit of the money, and it is not the money. It's like retiring on 50,000 ounces. 50,000 ounces of what? Well, the guy didn't know. They blew their currency situation over there, too. But there was a time you could live off the interest, just like a lot of people. Anybody get a CD? Nobody's got CDs. Okay, good. But there are people in this country trying to live off the interest of CDs, aren't they? You live off the interest. That's what they did. And you could live off the interest of 50,000 marks. The company closed out his savings account, sent him a check for 200,000 marks, and told him your account isn't worth keeping open. How could they do that? The price of the postage stamp on that man's letter was 2 million marks. That's how they did it. Your life insurance policy, your savings accounts, all of those are merely bookkeeping entries. There ain't nothing there. You got any idea what's going to happen if people found that out? I'm kind of glad maybe that this room isn't full. I just assume we kind of corrected this problem slowly. In Germany, for example, we just use them as an illustration. We're actually probably in worse shape than Germany was in the 1920s. The only thing is, the bubble hasn't burst yet. But we are probably in a worse financial condition than Germany was in the 1920s. If that seems possible. It used to be in 1914 that with 1.5 marks, this is just a 1 mark note, with 1.5 marks of the funny money, or whatever it was, silver, you could get a pound of butter. A mark was equal to 25 cents in U.S. silver back in 1914. In 1918, just 4 years later, it took 3 marks to get the pound of butter. In 1922, in the spring thereof, it took a mere 2,400. In the summer, same year, it went up to 150,000. And in the wintertime, the price had elevated just a little bit to 6 billion marks. Hard to believe that a mark was equal to 25 cents in U.S. silver in 1914. But things can really go to pot when you start floating numbers of absolutely nothing. This is a 1 mark note, a 1,000 mark note, a 50 million mark note. Nothing to it, just print a number on there. In fact, the back of this note was blank. Most of the notes that they circulated toward the end were blank on the back side. There doesn't have to be anything on the back side. The contract, the fraudulent contract, is on the front. You don't need anything on the back. In fact, these were useful because at least you had a place to write your girlfriend's or Pizza Hut telephone number. But the best note in our collection is a 1,000 mark note. 1,000, 1,000, 1,000. It never went into circulation at 1,000 marks. They overprinted it, and you can just barely read it here diagonally. It now says, "1 million mark." What is it now? 1 million. How'd they do that? Just stamp it on. You couldn't have gotten anything for 1,000 marks. You couldn't have gotten a bubblegum wrapper for 1,000 marks. They just stamp it on. It's now 1 million marks. In fact, if that hadn't been good enough, we could stamp 1 trillion on the other way. Just change the ink, just change the number, run it through again. You know, confidence wanes in a system like that. And I've got a photograph back home of a woman lighting a wood stove, and she's just packing that thing full of these notes. The more there is, the less it's worth. They even had postage stamps up to 50 million denomination. 50 million mark stamp right there. I got the stamps. I mean, these are real. What's the bottom line of this whole thing? Piggy the Silver Swine says, "I wouldn't mind being poor if it wasn't for being so short of cash." That's it, folks. There's no cash. I've heard it preached from a Baptist pulpit back east in our state of Maine. We're heading for a cashless society. And you know, a lot of people are talking about that. We went 100% cashless when? 1965. The silver came out of circulation in 65. In 68, right, they repudiated redemption of the notes. Yes. But the silver was already taken out of circulation in 65. We have been without cash, without money, without a medium of exchange since 1965. Is that news? To some people it's news. Some people do it. I got an idea most people don't know it. What do you got? Well, people say, well, I can go down to the bank and I can cash a check. Is that so? Let me see if I can find the book. Those of you who've got checking accounts, going to go down and cash a check, right? I bet you thought. Federal Reserve Bank of New York, second edition, 1980, page 7. Banks don't keep cash in checking accounts. How many believe you can cash a check? It is impossible. Why? Because there's no cash there. They say they don't transfer any cash or coin. Checkbook balances are transferred between accounts as bookkeeping entries only. Is that right? Yeah. Who says? Chicago Federal Reserve Bank, page 3. You don't have to go too far in this book. Whole sentence. Deposits are merely book entries. How do you rob a bank? You steal their books. Did you know what would happen if you stole the books from a bank and tried to spend their bank ledgers? The person would say, you fool. That's just numbers on pieces of paper. Yeah, that's right. That's what it is. Just a number on a piece of paper. And they've got an armored car out there with bulletproof glass and a guy at the ready with his revolver. And what are they carrying out of the bank? Bad checks and bad notes. And those are valuable. What a fraud. They won't pay on any one of those instruments. In anything. Except another note. Heck, I'll do that. And I don't need a guard to guard my checks that'll do that. He'd say my check was worthless, and you'd be right. They get guards out there that'll die to protect a bad check and a bad note. Why? Because they're getting paid in those things. They think it's money. Oh, mind control is so sweet. And the tyranny gets worse and worse and worse when the people say, I don't think this is an honest system. I don't want to play. That's when they start applying the force. You will play. And as we start pulling out, come out of her, my people, says it does say in the Revelation letter, come out of her, my people, the Babylonian system. When you start coming out, that's when the system's going to have to say, no, you're not. You're going to play. And it will do anything to keep you in the system. Oh, we could hit upon so many things. We could hit upon the law of supply and demand. No such law of supply and demand. I didn't know that until Merrill Jenkins put me straight. Deficit spending. You know the government's deficit spending? Have you ever tried to spend a deficit? A deficit, by definition, is a deficiency of amount. How do you spend one of those? I had a businessman tell me, sure, it's easy. He says, you just spend more than you take in. I said, well, let's suppose raisins were money. Here are 2 boxes of raisins. Spend 3 boxes of raisins, please, and define and describe the 3rd box, the one you didn't have. Geez, he said, I don't know. He says, the good thing we got Ronald Reagan down there. He'll take care of it. And he started walking out the door. Wait just a minute. Come back. If we monetize gold and spend it, by percentage, how much can we spend? 100%? If we monetize silver and spend it, how much can we spend? 100%. If we monetize deficits and spend them, how much can we spend? We'd have to know, because when we run out of deficits, folks, our country's going to be broke. And I've asked my congressman to tell me where the end of the deficit barrel is, and he won't tell me. Well, let's hit upon some solutions here. Word control is mind control. The only way we're going to get out of this thing is to, 1, start employing strict construction of our language. Humanism knows no absolutes. No moral absolutes, no absolutes at law, and no absolutes in definition of terms. I didn't invent these words, and I didn't invent their definitions. I have taken the definitions of the terms and strictly applied them. If you will do that, you will understand a subject. Just like looking up the word J-E-W in the Bible. If people would do that, they'd figure out that that wasn't Israel, wouldn't they? But we don't look up our words. We just assume we know everywhere, we know what that means. Like Gentile. Everybody knows what that means. Oh, jeez. Tell your neighbor, because your neighbor has got to know, because your neighbor will throw you in the hooskow if you start acting on this material because he doesn't understand it. In fact, you're exhorted in Ezekiel 33, 6 and 9 to be the watchman. If you see the sword coming and you don't issue the warning, then your blood shall I require of thee. If you see the sword coming, and folks, there is one. I don't care if most everybody out there thinks there isn't one coming. There's a sword coming. Do you believe it? If you see the sword coming and you issue the warning and the people heed not, then the blood is on their head. What's your responsibility as a Christian? To at least shift the responsibility. Start shifting. We could separate. We got people here who get checking accounts and savings accounts. I'm not going to tell you what to do with those, but boy, you keep an awful company. Every buck you deposit in your account allows the bank to create more numbers, which makes your numbers there in the account worth less and less and less and less. If you don't believe it, look at the price of new vehicles and the price of peanut butter. They're not going down. Number two, you have a right in a free country to privacy. When I go to the bathroom, I close the door. Why? Because what I'm doing there is immoral? No, you do it too. But in a free country, you have a right to close the door. 60 Minutes, a couple of years ago, was given permission by a couple in California to examine a checking account. How many people saw that program? And Mike Wallace did an expose, and just by looking at the checks of that couple in question, he was able to determine how much they earned, where they went to work, where they went on vacation, how long they stayed on vacation, how much they spent on vacation, what their political affiliation was, even the birth control method of the couple in question. There is nothing that cannot be found out about you by our government. How? Through the information collection network in your hometown called the bank. The only purpose of a bank is to collect information on you. Who says? Well, in a roundabout way, the Boston Federal Reserve Bank tells you. In electronic money, page 59. Ponder this, because there are people here who know there have been changes made in banking. Our young people think that when you go down to an electronic bank and you stick a little plastic card in, that's normal. There are people here who remember when you deposited gold coins and silver coins in that bank. Things ain't the same. The loaf of bread isn't a dime weight anymore. It's $1 and $1.50. Page 59. Advances in computer and communications technology are paving the way for major changes in banking practices, many of them based upon the premise that money is information. About whom? You. To be used by whom? Who do you think? For what purposes? Yes. You have a right to privacy. I'll say no more. But the Bible says, come out from amongst them and be ye separate. How? Well, seek no more legislation. Seek no additional privileges. In fact, I operate as much unprivileged as possible. You've got a little bit of a basic idea why I operate unregistered, untitled, uninspected, uninsured, and without a driver's license. How many people here operate the same way? I'm the only one? You do that and nobody wants to raise a hand. Oh, very good. I'm not alone. I suspect I'm not alone. I suspect that there are others that are very close to that. You have a right to travel. You here, folks, are assembling. You have a right to assemble. First Amendment right. If you have the right to be here, you have the correlative right to get here. How do you get here? From Maine. You don't walk. You get in your property, your vehicle. Property is the highest right to anything, the right to possess and use. You have a right to travel. It's even enumerated in Black's 5th edition. Of course you have a right to do it. But you don't have a right to do it if you apply for the driver's license. You know what happens when you apply for the driver's license? You waive all your constitutional protection on the highway. That's been established in the courts. You have no constitutional protection on the highway. Why? Because you applied for the driver's license. I'm not suggesting that you just go willy-nilly tear it up and so forth, because the state is really nasty to people that don't have them. And I stuck my neck out by telling you that I don't. But I honestly believe that if I stand here in front of you people telling you what I'm telling you, that I must act upon what I believe to be true. And if I stand up here with all of the nexus established between me and the government, if I file 1040 forms, whatever file means, then I would be a hypocrite to stand here and tell you about this fraud. So I do not fill out 1040 forms, and I don't know how many other taxes you can imagine that I get around. Because I don't owe them, and neither do you. But I couldn't stand here with a straight face, participating in the system and telling you what I know to be true. Incur no additional debts. I hope that when you go by the bank tomorrow morning and you look at that beautiful building, you look at that and say, geez, I don't think I'm going to go down next week and take another loan to get another car. I think maybe I'll drive what I got. I don't think I'll get any deeper into this thing. I think I'll start getting out of it. You might consider renting instead of mortgaging. I didn't say owning, but the mortgage is nothing more than a perpetual rent. 30 and 40 years of guaranteed rent. We could get into many other things, but I'm going to tell you what I'm doing. Starting July 4th of this year, my wife and myself will no longer accept Federal Reserve notes. That means if you want to kick into the kitty Federal Reserve notes, they will be refused. Starting July 4th. Our place of business that we operated, I ran a food business for 10 years in the state of Maine, and it was a very successful business, I guarantee it. A very good business. We did not take checks. In the last couple of years, I didn't have a checking account, and I ran my business very well without it. In fact, in the last couple of years I ran my business, I didn't even count the Federal Reserve notes that came over the counter. Can you imagine that? I never counted the stuff. I just figured I worked there. It was none of my business. I'll take a polygraph test. I don't know what I took in. And you know what? I don't care. Bookkeeping became so simple. You get my drift. I became free. Well, I had to do something else beyond that. I had to tell somebody else. Because when the house is on fire, you got to tell people who own the house, your house is on fire. Maybe you already knew that. Starting July 4th, we will no longer accept Federal Reserve notes. And if you want a video cassette that we have, it'll be $3 in silver. If you want books that we have, Creditors, Debtors, Slave, it'll be 30 cents in silver. If you want 5% of what, it'll be 90 cents in silver. Period. We will not play in the system. That is the only thing that we as producers can do to put a halt to this fraud, is to stop giving our faith to the system. Because according to the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, page 4, all of the paper money issued today is Federal Reserve notes. The real backing for the nation's money is faith. Hebrews 11:1 tells us, now faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. And it tells us in the Hebrew letter, 11:6, isn't it? That without faith it is impossible to please Him. Our faith is misplaced. We drop out. And we start within our own circle of acquaintances paying our debts at law in gold and silver coin. Or barter. But barter is very cumbersome. And it won't take a lot of gold and silver. Now for those people who are of the Sheldon Emery persuasion that think that there is no solution to this thing as far as the bank fraud is concerned, it only takes a couple minutes. We eliminate that problem. Number one, you audit the Federal Reserve. If we would do it, we probably won't, but you could. Audit the Fed, establish what they hold for gold and silver and where it is. You haul it back. Congress has the power to get it back. They've got an Air Force and a Navy and so forth. They can get it. Take it to the Treasury, strike it into coin form. This time you weigh the coins in what? Dollars? No. We do what Thomas Jefferson suggested to Alexander Hamilton on page 624 of Contest for Sound Money. Maybe we better weigh them in ounces. Weigh our coins in ounces and fractions thereof, and we return the coins back to the banking system, and we all go down to the bank with our Fed notes and our checks, and we bid at auction for the gold and silver that's there. Why, it might take $1,000 in Fed notes to get a 1-ounce silver coin. Is that a problem? Of course not. The $20,000 Cadillac becomes a $200 Cadillac, payable in silver. And we now don't need 11-digit calculators. You then tell the banks you can't create this money anymore. We shut them down. We've now got thousands and thousands of vacant buildings downtown, which would make beautiful hotels. If you want an office, grab a bank. If you don't grab a bank, they're going to grab you, because they've already got you by the shoulder in a few other places right now. If we don't do this, if we don't protest this fraud, then we're going to have to do probably what Francis Schaeffer, the theologian, said in his book, Christian Manifesto. We protest, we then flee, and we then fight. And when he said fight, he didn't mean the two-edged sword Bible. He meant the two-edged sword. But we won't get into that, because that's just a little bit too gory right now. But I suspect we're going to get into it anyway, in our lifetime, most of us. Not because we want to, but because the Proverbs tells us in 29:19, the servant will not be corrected by words, our public servant, for though he understand, he will not answer. How do you think we're going to get correction? The rod of reproof? It's going to be exciting. But we've got a promise in Leviticus 26:7 and 8. 5 of you will put to flight 100, and 100 of you will put to flight tens of thousands, and they will fall before you by the sword. But you have to do it in accordance with this book right here. Without it, you do nothing. Last point, and this is one that I think you ought to consider. A lot of people say, well, what you're saying is logical and it makes sense, but you might lose in court, and if you lose in court, that proves you're wrong. This book here is part of a trial practice series. It's 7250. This is not a free book. This one is authored by Jeffrey L. Kessler, who is the adjunct professor of law at Georgetown University Law Center. The purpose of this book, and this book is for basically attorneys only. When you get on a witness stand in any courtroom, if you've read this, you know how your attorney is going to grill you. In fact, you're even going to be able to predict what the attorney is going to wear, because this will even tell you what you should wear as an attorney in that courtroom, so you don't offend the jury. This book tells you how to get information. Page 3. This book is designed to assist litigators in getting information from people who do not want to give it to them. That's the purpose of this book. And here's the point I want to make, and I'm going to let you go. Page 4. To the uninitiated, it may come as a great shock that our system of justice does not really involve a search for truth. That's our first witness. That is the adjunct professor of law here. Our second witness. Professor Younger disabuses his students of this notion in the very first minute of his course on evidence. If you believe that law is a search for truth, and you take Professor Younger's course on evidence, in the very first few minutes, he's going to take that idea and wash that right out of your head. Is it any wonder why we send our kids to school and they come back not... The adults can't even converse with them. I had a man in Colorado, he says, my gosh, he says, I can talk to you, you make sense. He says, I got kids, he says, 4 of them. I think it was 4 of them. He says, I can't... He says, they don't make sense. He says, we're at odds all the time. They all went to college. I said, you didn't do them any favor. If you want to have strife in the home, send them away, and they'll come back and they think that they're really a lot smarter than you are. You really don't know anything. And this is the type of people that are teaching them. Here's the third witness, if 2 isn't enough. At a recent seminar on trial advocacy, a distinguished federal judge put it thus, quote, law is not a search for truth. Period. What is it then? The whole objective is to achieve the highest quality of justice in the least amount of time at the lowest possible cost. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yes, I do. But I don't know why I should bother, because it doesn't appear as though you people are interested in it anyway. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'd like to have you look at this book. I'm here to try to expose what I believe to be true, 100% true, not just a little bit. if you raise this issue in a courtroom in the United States, the odds don't favor you, do they? Why? I'm not saying that you couldn't get a good decision in a court. They are possible, but they are not probable. Why? Because if you attack this system in the government courts, you are cutting the jugular vein of the tyranny that will wipe you out. And the court system is used in this country to sustain the tyranny that has already been put in place. And this has been put here to make sure that you never ask any questions about it. This is the 10th plank of the Communist Manifesto. Impressive, isn't it? Not too bad. Going to get you up before midnight. I thank you very much for your kind attention. I hope that what we have thrown out at you in a very, it may seem like a long period of time. I'm sure to some it does. But you know, people will go through most of their lives, 70 years and longer, and never know what hit them. And it's very difficult to unravel 30, 40, 50, 60 years of erroneous thinking in a 20 and 30-minute seminar. I haven't been able to do it. It took me quite a while to rigidly apply the strict definition of terms. But you'll walk out of here, and I'm sure you'll say, well, I got to pay for this, and I got to buy that, and oh, here's $10, and you got any more money? Many of you are probably going to fall right back into using the same words because you're bombarded by them day in and day out. Either that or you're going to think that this was a waste of time or that the guy who spoke here was maybe a little bit far-fetched. I hope not. But the only way your neighbors are going to ever know what you know is if you strictly construe and apply your language. Thank you very much. God bless you all.
Bruce McCarthy spoke the evening of May 26, 1984, in the Walla Walla High School Commons Building.